Right, good afternoon everybody, thank you for coming. So I think, because we've got quite a lot of new faces around the table, we might do some introductions if that's alright.
Okay, Phil Kane, Deputy Chief Constable, North Yorkshire Police.
Lee Smith, North Yorkshire Fire Group Manager for Operational Assurance and Health and Safety.
Welcome Lee.
Carl Bowlesman, North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service and the Head of Professional Standards.
Thank you, Carl.
I'll just round to me. Hello, Kieran Irvin, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable with responsibility for local policing, North Yorkshire Police.
Chief Inspector Fiona Willey, Proactive Policing, North Yorkshire Police.
Will Naylor, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for North Yorkshire.
Andrew Brodie, Chief Fire Officer.
And Julian Mulligan, Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. I think we have apologies from Chief Constable, Al Westcott and Rob Bowles. If we could go to the minutes of the last meeting, please. Anybody got any comments? It looked fairly straightforward, as normal.
It's hard to have comments on
Yes.
this, isn't it?
Yep, no, okay, so they're approved. And then the action log. So the place-based business case is still work ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah, the public safety, yes it is, yes.
Yeah, so that's part of Transform 2020, yes. And that will come back in due course. Now, the fracking...
I'm not sure it needs to be an action for here. It's something that's going on anyway.
So maybe the best thing to do is, once it's gone through the proper processes, to have an update. Yeah, so let's close that then. So Kirby Misperton there's a verbal on the agenda, item 7. Are we going to do that?
No, that's deferred to next month.
Okay,
so
so
the agenda for today is quite busy, with an update from the Chief Fire Officer on the review that he came to.
Yeah.
ACC Oliver's kindly agreed to defer that to next month.
Okay, great. And then the next one is closed as well. So that's the actions done as well.
There was one, I don't think we put it as an action, Karen, but just to pick up outside the meeting, I was going to look at the section 136 detentions with somebody. Yeah. Which it doesn't need to be an action for here, but I'll pick it with you afterwards.
We've actioned that through the Force Ops Board, and Ed Hayward Noble will be in touch with you to invite you in to go through the working practices around how we review arrests and custody detentions.
All right, fantastic, thank you. So I understand we've got no questions from the public, is that correct, Simon?
No.
No, right, okay. So then, fee, if Andrew, if it's okay, we've agreed to move fees item up to the first substantive agenda.
Absolutely, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Oh, you terms of reference.
Just very quickly, terms of reference, the formal bit. Terms of reference, we've just updated those to reflect that the Fire and Rescue Service now attend. Andrew's a sort of standing attendee, and your job titles now Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. So they're the only changes that we've made. Okay, great, thank you. So they're agreed then. Okay, Fee, you're on.
Okay, right. So I've come to talk to you about ANPR and cross-border criminality, to give you an overview basically of how we tackle it, how we've invested with ANPR to try and assist with that. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So there we go. Everyone can see that. So what's on there at the moment is this is the ANPR strategy. So as you can see at the centre of that is the transparency. So we've got to be really clear that ANPR in itself could have concerns for public. I think the term a ring of steel has been used in the past, which it's not about that. It's making sure that we're actually putting those safeguarding measures in place. It's important that we follow procedures and controls to support the proportionate use of ANPR. So that's basically at the heart of the strategy.
Fee, can I just ask, it might be just helpful for the people who are listening who are not familiar with ANPR, it might be just worthwhile just giving a really brief overview as to what it is and how you use it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'll cover that later, but I'll do it at the beginning. So ANPR is the automatic number plate recognition system.
Correct.
And I have made a note to say that.
It is a bit of a mouthful,
so I do apologise for that. And basically these are, there's a number of different ways. Obviously the police, law enforcement, private companies have ANPR now, which will read number plates when they are triggered going in. Not necessarily all the data is kept, but they are kept for certain lengths of time. There's governance over how long we can keep information for. And they will only ping up if there is a PNC Act marker or a niche marker. Niche is what we use as our police internal recording system. So if there is a marker put on that vehicle, it might be for no insurance, it could be that there's somebody that's wanted in it. When that hits an ANPR camera, that will send an alert to the ANPR hub. That's what we're talking about in our context. So that's ANPR in a very basic nutshell.
That's brilliant.
But hopefully
Fantastic.
through this you'll see
Yeah.
evidence of it, because I've got a couple of videos, so hopefully we can see what that
Fabulous.
is. So, and as I've just said there's a large amount of data that is available, but it's important that we actually maintain that public confidence and that we're using that data proportionately and necessary to what we actually want to use it for. Moving on to the control strategy, that is what sets what we look at in terms of ANPR. So the proportionate use of it is in line with the control strategy. So that is what we link our priorities to in terms of what the hits will be on those specific markers for those drivers.
So you have priorities in the control strategy, like human trafficking, for example, and if you get any intelligence from an ANPR hit that has relevance to that, then you'll take action.
Yeah, and it might be that it's just to monitor, or it might be that vehicle needs stopping. There'll be certain key elements as to what we need to do with that marker.
So, and that control strategy is devised from our strategic intelligence assessment as to where those key specific threats and risks are to North Yorkshire communities.
Yeah, okay. And then obviously moving on to intelligence-led, because ANPR is actually an intelligence function. So it's another tool in the toolbox, if you like, is to be able to gather that information, looking at obviously the proactive patrol teams and then investigative resources, so we can use it post-incident, so looking at that disrupt and deter, and also once we've got an investigation ongoing, we can use ANPR to do the back office and use it to build that investigation picture as well. So it's important that the hub and the investigation teams work closely together on that unit. Research is undertaken as part of those investigations, and then intelligence teams will provide that expert knowledge to help those investigators achieve their aims. So, for example, if we're looking at convoy analysis or conspiracies, ANPR will form or can form part of that investigation strategy. The ANPR hub itself is, which I'll explain how that's set up shortly, but they will deal with live time incidents. So if that hits the stack, as it's called, the ANPR hub will deal with that live time, sending whichever resources are appropriate to go and deal with that hit as it comes in. But again, linking in with the intelligence hubs and FIB if we need to expand that intelligence picture. So for example, it's a firearms job, we need to obviously do a full risk assessment on that, so we then go and get that further information. The intercept and tasking capability, again, that was brought in through the ANPR hub. Basically, based on what I've said there and the control strategy priorities, who is the best people to go and deal with those incidents? So most of that will be controlled from the hub. So when we're looking at areas, we'll put in bids for resources based on the control strategy. We will then look at who's the best resource to be able to go and deal with that bid and then line it up with the ANPR priorities as well. Because a lot of the bids, if it's county lines, say for example Natasta Scarborough, the ANPR will do the work as to where we need to be strategically placed in terms of those county lines movements going into Scarborough. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, or you might not know, but our safety camera vans are also equipped with ANPR as well, so that's another...
All of them?
Not all of them, no.
I do notice the ones that do have it.
Yes, yes. So again, that's really beneficial to us. Obviously we know that they've got a primary role, but they can also help to supplement our ANPR capability in terms of where we haven't got the static cameras, and we know that the criminals start to know where the main routes are, so we can use those safety cameras as a bit of a...
Question on that then.
Yes.
Is the ANPR a byproduct of the vans being stationed on, the A whatever, for a speeding concern, or are they occasionally deployed because they're easier to move than other ANPR cameras. They are put in a place that might be useful from an ANPR footing rather than a road safety footing.
So what we've agreed, so I don't know if you know, from safety camera vans, obviously you've got your speed sites that they will use, and they've also got the road safety sites. So where we have data that seat belts, mobile phones, which you can imagine there are a lot of those.
Yeah.
So they will tend to go on one of those sites, but then utilise the ANPR. But they have got the PIAs, can't remember what the PIA is now. I'm going to put it written down. The data protection impact assessment have all been done for each of the safety camera vans as well, so that if we did want to deploy it purely for ANPR, it has got that impact assessment attached to it.
It's not the only mobile capability for ANPR we have either. So
Yes.
So it is not just...
We have got the mobile cameras as
So
well.
they are road safety first and foremost, but they
Absolutely.
pick up
Yeah.
helpful ANPR information that you can utilise
Yeah.
as you see fit.
So if you've got a particular operation, you might deploy them specifically for the ANPR.
So for example, I mean, we've never sort of said that is purely for ANPR. So for
Right.
example, I've wanted to deploy for county lines, and we know there's a specific route that doesn't have an ANPR camera, but there's intelligence to say that we know it's being used. So I will liaise with Andy Tuck from the Roads Bureau, and he will have a number of sites that are
On that
needed
road.
for mobile phones, seat belts, etc. So that's what we will
Two
deploy
birds, one
them to.
stone.
Yes.
Right, it's just I'm just imagining some of the queries that we get from members of the public.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
But
yeah.
they will be doing their road safety job, because what they can't do is they cannot read the ANPR.
no.
So that will come back to the hub.
Yes.
So all
So they've no idea
all
who
that's
they're
doing
seeing.
is pinging
Yeah.
back to the hub.
Okay.
They cannot act on that ANPR.
Yeah.
But I will have units nearby to do that while they
Yeah.
carry on doing their road safety bit. Does that
Yep.
seem to make sense? So, and again, you know, we can use them if there's a coordinating response to a significant crime threat, which luckily we haven't had, but again, it's just that extra resilience if we need it. Then we've gone to rich data, which is looking at opportunities to combine the ANPR data. So this is things like overlaying it with mobile phone, cell data, that type of stuff. So it doesn't act on its own, it builds that bigger picture. And then we're looking at obviously working with other law enforcement agencies, partners. As you know, most car parks now have ANPR if you've been caught parking for longer than 2 hours and been hit with a £60 fine, which tends to be the member of the public's gripe about ANPR, not the police side of the ANPR, which is I'm glad to hear. Connectivity, again, is about how we work with other people. And if we obviously need to expand our infrastructure, there is real strong working relationships to actually have that in conversation. We don't just go and do it, we have to consult with people to do that. And again, many of the people that we share ANPR data with have got shared responsibilities under counter-terrorism and serious and organised crime and child protection, so it is a joint effort. So, ANPR. So 2001 is where it started, although if you look, the Met did actually get it a little bit earlier than everybody else. But
Surprise.
yeah, it's no surprise there. In 2013, the regional road crime team came back to force, and decision was made to retain those, and that's when we started the first NYP ANPR pilot hub, which consisted of 1 sergeant and 2 support staff. And we had...
Yeah, it would also be fair to say that the infrastructure wasn't brilliant at that stage.
No, we just
Yeah.
had Louis had a
Yeah.
few in the cars,
Yeah.
and 2 or 3. There wasn't
Yeah.
many static cameras about either, so it was very limited. So those amount of staff could manage what was coming through
Yeah.
because they haven't got the wider infrastructure.
And there was also, I mean, some of the local councils have paid for some cameras and stuff like that as well, haven't they? I
Yes,
think.
yes.
Yeah.
York City Council paid
Yeah,
for some.
Craven had.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So, and obviously following that, the pilot was a success. We were getting results through that, but like you said, the infrastructure wasn't there, the staffing wasn't there to actually build on that infrastructure. So we then moved the hub to the force control room, and utilised the force control room staff to bolster that hub. But as you know, competing demands with call centre and the hub, it wasn't always ideal. And from the Ashley Hall murder, it was imperative that the stack, as we call it, is monitored 24/7, and that's because there was a route where potentially they've hit ANPR cameras where it could have been stopped. So it's important that we actually make sure we've got that 24/7 capability. So following that move, there was then a review of the hub in 2016, and this identified, there was a number of recommendations, but some of the key ones was to enhance the proactive process. So how do we then react to those hits that are coming in? It's all right them pinging, but what are we doing about it? Increase speculative searches and then align the ANPR intelligence with the planning and tasking element, which is what I talked about a little bit earlier, is which resources are going to go and deal with that. It also looked at introducing an enhanced tasking facility and ANPR intelligence capability within that hub. So following that review, I think I presented to yourself, Julie, didn't I? To look at increasing the staff and actually making the hub a standalone, so that the staff that were in there were based on ANPR, not being borrowed from the force control room all the time. So currently we've got one sergeant, a PC who is the tasking and resource and coordinator, 3 operators per shift for the resilience. So again, they'll do all the radio channels and the pings coming in, and then what we call an IDO, who is the intelligence part. So they're able to do that research live time. We've also got a ANPR analyst that can help with that rich data picture. They've literally just finished writing the ANPR strategy, strategic assessment, so that is for us to be able to, so I want to eventually be ahead of the ping when it comes past, not getting our units chasing it up, so that strategy will really, really help us to do that. And an ANPR technician, so again, 113 cameras to maintain. We need to make sure that they're all working, so we've also invested in that as well. So the benefits of that basically are that we've improved our intelligence development, we're quick time based on those lifetime hits, we've got the investigative side to be able to provide that data to support investigations, and obviously with the increase of the infrastructure we're able to cover more area in North Yorkshire.
So you've got an increased infrastructure, more staff looking at more data.
Yes.
Do you have the operational support? So you've got all this stuff coming in. Do you have enough cars on the road and units on the road to then deal with the stuff that's coming in?
But nothing else is coming in, yeah. We have got, obviously we did the ops review which looked at how we merged our road crime teams into our OSU teams, so operational support units. So they've all been given advanced drivers so that they can react to these hits. So we have now, in effect, rather than 1 road crime team, we've got 4. But also they have got dual skills as well. So if we get high risk missing from home, obviously we've got to balance that demand based on the threat and risk at the time. We can't hit everything on the stack.
Sure.
Because
there's a lot on it.
I tried to get the figures for you today to tell you exactly. Within an hour they'd had over 300, so you think, but again they're assessed, so they will, if the PNC Act marker is we need to stop this car, that's what we concentrate on. Some of them are not.
I think depending on the threat that particular hit poses to the public or others, then there are resources available to respond. So for example, if that's a firearms marker on a vehicle, then we will react to that and respond to it and deal with it. So it isn't that we've got resources waiting to tackle people with, for example, no insurance or other things. Actually, there's a level there of hitting a high threat and high harm.
So a member of the public posed this to me the other day. So fully understanding all that, you can only do a certain amount, and it also depends what other things are going on outside of ANPR. But of all the sort of, I imagine 250 of those hits are no insurance or no MOT or something like that. Can anything be done automatically, like sending a letter or something that says we are aware that you are driving without something?
It depends on what other intelligence is around that vehicle. So actually it might be no insurance marker, but it might be linked to an organised crime group, or it might be linked to other criminality. So it might be a way for us to stop that vehicle and have a look whether there's any other criminality going on. So it isn't supposed.
No, but for all of those that you can't do anything with. Oh well, I suppose are you saying you can't? There's not enough capacity to research all of those 300 in that hour, but it's not worth trying to send something automatically.
And the
to
thing
sort of-
is
to let people know that you're
obviously
aware of
until you
something.
stop that car, you don't know who's in it. They might have a temporary insurance licence that's not on P&C. I mean, it's a lot easier now because most things are on P&C, but if you've got it moving on that road, you need to be speaking to that driver because there may be other reasons that aren't on P&C. Obviously, you know we've got Op Spartan, which looks at those other types of offences. So there could be some sort of line up with that, but again, it's looking at the...
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just imagine most of those are pretty straightforward things, and I'm not saying you should prosecute someone and say you're fine, just to say we think you were driving without insurance. You might not have been, but we think anyway. I'll leave it there. That was,
I think the administrative burden.
I know, and
Yeah.
postage and all that stuff. I just sort of
Yeah.
someone asked me, so I thought I'd ask you.
Yeah. Okay. Just a little video, just to give myself a break, because I'm sure you listen to me all the time. So this is just to give you an idea of the type of things that we can do, and it's all linked to ANPR.
Please make every effort to locate him because he will be out there committing crime. Okay, the next one is the one that's on the board. It's November uniform 10 Tango Yankee Oscar. It's coming into our area 3 or 4 times in a week and it's committing rural crime, so we really need to get hold of this one, please. Okay, your deployments for today then, please, if you're listening.
Just be aware, please, we've had a reliable sighting on the A19 northbound for the vehicle that was in briefing this morning, a white Ford Luton van with the VRM November uniform 10 Tango Yankee Oscar.
Firearms officers who are deployed, they've got ANPR in the vehicles. We look at it for rural crime, dog officers missing from homes, a whole array of tools and things in the toolbox that we can use linked to ANPR. So when we talk about...
Can you proactively add things to your list then? So you've got things that come up automatically as wanted or firearms marks or things, but if someone goes missing, do you get their number plate from a family member, chuck it on the system, and then you'll know if it has turned up somewhere?
Yeah.
Or somewhere?
Yeah.
And
we've had that.
That isn't just shared within our force either. So
No.
that's available to other forces.
We had an example of that last week, didn't we? Just when we were talking about
Yeah.
the prep work for this, a member or a gentleman or man had abducted 2 young children over a custody issue in a foreign force and come on us. Mum was obviously massively worried, reported it. We got his vehicle details on the box.
That was
fairly
from
quickly.
Devon and Cornwall.
Right,
And we got him
and
in
he stopped, kids brought back to safety. So you can see the sort of the immediacy of being able to respond to sort of live action jobs as well as the reactive and investigative piece there. So there's a real link into sort of managing vulnerability and safeguarding.
Yeah. Yeah, that was quite timely, that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So again, it's talking about, and Mr Kane's just hit on it there, is that we share cameras with our bordering forces. So we're not just on an isolated North Yorkshire. We are able to know what's on other cameras. And I'll speak later, but when we go on to the national ANPR system that's coming in, again, that's a wider piece, so that's a national database. So we work closely with our neighbouring forces, we share cameras, looking at cross-border routes, making sure that they're covered, and then maximising those opportunities to be able to deter and detect those that are coming in. It's important that the hub builds those relationships. We have regional meetings, so again, looking at best practice, lessons learned, what we can do to improve that working relationship so that we're not missing opportunities when they're coming through. And this gives us that early heads up as well. so that we can successfully intercept any of those vehicles. So working very, very closely with, for example, Cleveland, Durham, if they've got an OCG, Organised Crime Group coming, they will give us the heads up so that we can get our resources aligned, ready to do a safe stop on that vehicle. Just talking earlier, when we talk about cross-border, 22.5%, and this is a loose figure, just because of how the data is collated at the moment, is showing that they are offenders that are non-North Yorkshire. But that's based on the crime having an offender linked to it. So we do know that people are coming in from elsewhere, and particularly for county lines, organised crime. Certainly that's the biggest sort of cross-border areas that we're looking at. But again, that is loose because it depends on what address is linked to that offender at the time of doing the analysis.
Is there any understanding of those kinds of figures attached to rural crime?
We can break it down. When it was broken down, it was into serious and organised crime, acquisitive crime. So, but if you choose it, they could.
So can you say Selby, for example, it gets a lot of complaint from residents about people coming up from South Yorkshire and various other locations. Presumably, I mean, it's partly the reason I've asked is the National Police Chiefs Council and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners have done some work looking at crime prevention and what works, and the evidence base isn't terribly compelling. But one of the things that clearly does work is effective hotspot policing. There will be hotspots that are vulnerable to cross-border crime, so you'd be able to have a sort of a map around North Yorkshire, and there'll be certain, I mean the pool, the bridge over, everybody, because there's one road over the river. So in the control strategy, you've got various different things in there, of which organised crime is one. But we know from the work that we've done around serious and organised crime that quite a lot of the intelligence and threat assessment around organised crime in rural areas is not very good, and therefore my concern would be that your focus is on the what we know is the higher end of stuff, and actually the cumulative impact of all of the serious and acquisitive crime, which is organised but doesn't meet the OCG threshold, if you see what I mean, isn't effectively being targeted through ANPR.
The strategic assessment that's been written works with the ANPR to show which cameras are activated the most. Now, as you appreciate, there may be going to be as many in the rural, but that's where we use the statics, which goes through the authorising officer. So if we have got an area that is getting targeted, we can go and put a static camera based on the evidence, and then what we'll do with the assessment is look at where the cameras are getting hit, and we will put effectively cops on dots on those areas, so that they're in that area to react to those hits when they're coming through.
I think what we as well through, and this is where the Rural Task Force and the Rural Watchers come into play, in the sense of they provide us with additional reach and stretch out into the sort of the more isolated areas. So, and each of those Rural Watch teams will liaise with the intelligence units on the other side of the line. So particularly the Hamilton Richmond will liaise with Durham and Cleveland. And if they identify someone who's, let's say, stealing quads, for example, which is a particular issue out in those areas, they'll work with those forces to identify the likely suspects, and then we can add any vehicles that we know that belong to them. We can add them to our hot lists of things to look at, and then when they trigger our cameras, we've got staff then ready to react. Because one of the key things with the ANPR functionality is that it can read so many registration plates a minute, where even if a cop was on that street corner, there's so many vehicles would go past, they wouldn't pick it up. So we do that on top of the sort of the standard high level organised crime activity, and that's where we have had some success across the Hambleton side, and we're now focusing our effort on the Craven side, because that's picked up again in terms of that type of criminality. So we've got some work ongoing in those areas to try and replicate the success, but liaising this time with West Yorkshire Police.
And I suppose part of the challenge is, I don't know if it's something you said before the meeting, Fiona, or during the meeting, but your 22.5% is based on the crimes that are attached to an individual. Most crimes aren't attached to an offender, and how many of those are the rural crimes that you're talking about, where you don't have someone to attach it to, so you can't do all that kind of work that we might like to think you can, to put you in a better position to respond to it.
There's also about building that intelligence picture, isn't it? So it isn't just
It's
used
not
to
just
react to those that know, it's about building the intelligence. So I think one of the areas you saw in the video was around poaching. I know that actually poaching is often linked to organised crime groups. So again, it's just building the intelligence picture in rural areas and having a look at working with those forces that border our rural areas and working out how we can make sure that that hot list that Kieran describes is actually as reflective as it can be of our travelling criminality.
I think we can certainly extrapolate from what we know about identified offenders set against individual crimes. That's the type of impact of us exporting criminals into the county versus other counties which might be exporting. And then when you look again at the stop and search activity that we do as well, that will help us identify sort of a whole range of different sort of characteristics of criminals that we import into our patch. And then that helps us focus efforts to try and make the place as hostile as we can to that environment.
And we are looking at putting ANPR into a couple of the rural vehicles. I know. Because again, getting up to that top end, Stokesley, etc., and that's why the proactive vehicles are the ones that have got them in, because they cover the whole of the county. And so again, we've got the cameras, but actually, if you're driving along, if you haven't got the camera in, you're going on your instinct like we used to do. Whereas if you've got the ANPR system, it'll tell you, so it gives you a little bit more as whether you need to stop that car or not. And by talking to those people, that's where you're going to build that intelligence picture.
So, on a specific point, then, sort of taking Julia's comment to sort of a specific, and I don't expect you to have the answer now on the top of your head, but given burglaries up in most parts of North Yorkshire, if you look at districts, do we have any idea how many of those are cross-border type offences and how many are homegrown?
No. Majority are local, although we have just had up Meteor, which was brilliant actually. It was in West Yorkshire. The 2-in-1 burglaries, but they were going down an aggravated route, so if they couldn't find the keys, they were then getting into the house and making physical threats. So we very quickly adopted up Meteor, and within 2 days working cross-border with West Yorkshire, the 4 main suspects have been arrested, and that's really dropped off. So again, very quick joint meeting, what we're going to do, what's the tactics, cops on dots as we did, which resulted in, I think we had 2 pursuits that night based on those offenders, and then they were arrested. So very, very quickly. But I wouldn't say that the majority of the burglaries, I would say the 2-in-1s are, but I'd say the domestic more local and more local people.
Okay.
So I was talking to forgotten what her title is, but she part of the NFU structure, and she's been doing some meetings with different forces recently, and she said that Craig Naylor has said this as well, who's the deputy in Lincolnshire, that sometimes it's quite difficult to get cooperation with neighbouring forces on some of these issues because they have other priorities, and this was particularly with West Yorkshire, and them not seeing quote unquote our rural crime as being important and important enough. Do we? Is that improving, or is it still quite challenging?
We have the regional rural crime meeting, which it was predominantly north east, but we've got West, Humberside, Cumbria, Lancashire. Everybody's on board now. So when we did the last checkpoint, all of those forces were involved. We had over 100 officers and 100 volunteers.
I know. I think checkpoint's brilliant, but it is a one-off thing. It's the everyday, all of the time, day-to-day swapping, coordination.
I mean, some of ours have obviously been adopted as OCGs anyway through the rural. So the Rocker were more than supportive on those. It's you're not talking about those ones that are below that threshold.
If I sort of come in, it's a daily struggle for the local area commanders to be able to escalate the right level of importance for the things that are harming us here. particularly into probably West and Cleveland are the two biggest areas that concern us in terms of them tackling what they perceive to be their problems versus the help. We've got some work ongoing which we've been nudging both the regional organised crime unit and the National Crime Agency to try and develop some proper terms of reference and terms of engagement. So if you've got criminals who live on your patch and they're causing harm cross-border, then that automatically becomes a regional organised crime unit responsibility, with the lead role in dealing with those criminals being the exporting force rather than the importing force in terms of victimisation. That's largely working through the county lines drugs activity at the moment, but it is a continued struggle. One of the ways to try and improve that, we've invited the National County Lines team up to come and understand that from the perspective of an importing force and use the national lead to reinforce that approach, because we would find we'll make more arrests for farm-based plant theft in foreign force areas than the host force of that offender. So many of our cops are spending more time in foreign force custody offices than they are in our own custody offices because of that very the nature of that problem. But we're between a rock and a hard place, and I think we could wait for those other forces to react and wait a long time, or we grasp the nettle and do what we need to do and then seek to influence behind that.
And do you just go over a border and deal with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let them know we're coming. Well, not the criminals, obviously.
Because
Because
there seems to be a lot of myth around that.
It depends on the type of operation.
Yeah.
So obviously, if there's a firearms element to it, then there's obviously the link across with the forces. If it's a case of we've got information in relation to where stolen quad bikes are being held, or there's a pursuit and that goes off into another force, then we carry on in relation to that.
Because people think that you just go into Cleveland.
No. I mean, I don't. Well, the Northallerton jewellery. I know it's not road, but the armed robbery at the jewellery shop, Cleveland led. So we sent up a team, go and get him. We just have that courtesy conversation to say we're in your force area.
And the rural task force have built really, really strong relationships with the local area-based intelligence teams across the line, and that pays dividends, even to the extent of starting to look at sharing intelligence systems and access, so that we can be a lot more flexible and responsive in terms of how we tackle that kind of stuff.
And that's very much the same as ANPR. It is literally like sharing. It's like talking now. That's how good the relationships are now with it.
I'm not sure if Kieran would support it or not, but I see from the Organised Crime Board that the support you get from exporting forces on county lines is better, because there's more pressure around them having to do that, because county lines are seen as a sort of national issue. And I think the sort of next step of that is trying to use that process that's led to that improvement on some of the other types of crime rather than just county lines, which is where some of this other rural crime sort of comes into it. But that is a different matter, because
that's the direction of travel for us. I mean, I see it more so, having come from another force into here, is that the people who are committing those crimes, because I know the individuals, particularly on the Cleveland side, the commodity criminals.
Yeah.
So it's drugs one week, it's kids the next week, it's plant or other, anything they can make a buck on.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, although there's national pressure because it's a national directed tasking in relation to county lines, what we want to do is we want to tackle them and use almost that Al Capone kind of approaches. We'll get them for something to prevent the criminality and reduce the impact of them on vulnerability. So they're the discussions we're having, but the national debate probably isn't as far along as that, because they may be thinking about different things in the moment, and we've got a different set of problems, but we've got to try and join that from both ends, really.
Okay.
He's just finished my presentation.
Sorry.
We've
said a lot of
10
it.
minutes.
We've said a lot of it. So next one, this again. So this is linking to control strategy, linking to the police and crime plan. The care. So this is about identifying the movement of goods, offenders, vulnerable people, certainly using that transport network. And that's not just drugs, which we do tend to sort of go back to drugs, but we're talking about human trafficking. We've had HGVs on the A1 where we've opened it, and we've got the human trafficking within those vehicles and things like that. So it's that early heads up from the forces. Child sexual exploitation victims. I was on duty one night, ANPR hit coming from Cleveland, male who is on an order not to go to this area for this vulnerable child. We picked him up on ANPR. His story didn't fit, and he was quite clearly going to obviously try and continue his grooming. So again, it's absolutely vital, but it's an intelligence tool, and we can only do something with it if something's put into it. If it's not on it, then we can't do it, and that's what we need to build on. Again, the ambitious collaboration, we are working with key partners. We work with 95 Alive, National Crime Agency, Regional Organised Crime Unit, and also your local authorities and partners.
Do you work with the private, the forecourts and all of that
more
sort of stuff?
for post-investigation, because
Right.
obviously we've got to do a lot of governance around
Right.
that. There's a lot of like RIPA, IP and all
Yeah.
that's got to come into that. But
Right.
yes, it is there
Yeah.
as a facility.
Yeah.
A bit like CCTV, you know, if you want to use
Yeah.
that, you've got to go
Yeah.
down the right avenue to do that. Looking at reinforcing local policing, I talk about proactive units a lot, but it's about the right resource that's in the right place. So we could send local units as well, depending on what we get on those activities, and the safety camera vans, which I've mentioned. And going back to that first strategy and transparency, it's about giving the public the confidence that we're doing it right and we're using it correctly, and we want to prevent the criminals coming to North Yorkshire. You know, we want to make it hostile for them people that you know, we're not going there because they'll be on us straight away, and that's what we want to do. So we've already touched on this, that we are bordered by 7 beautiful forces, where everybody wants to come to North Yorkshire. We don't mind that as long as the criminals don't, so that's what we're trying to achieve really. As Mr Irving said, it's acquisitive crimes as well, looking at your burglaries, your thefts, and then you're looking at your wider counter lines, counter-terrorism in some cases.
So clearly what ANPR has done has helped you respond to crime when it whether it's happened or not, when you see people or vehicles of interest. Have you, whether you've got evidence is a different matter, but do you get the sense that roads and vehicles are used less for committing crime now because policing is getting its act together on that, on monitoring the use of roads and vehicles?
I don't think they're using it. I mean, well, for example, county lines, we know they use the rail network. We've got to find different ways. I don't want to give too much away because it's a public forum, but maybe a discussion afterwards.
Sure.
But we know that they are looking at other ways because of ANPR.
There's much more sophistication on the part of the criminal, particularly organised criminal.
Well, that's right, because they're there to make a quick buck, and they know how to, you know, for example, you know, you hear that roads are not used depending on whether they've sussed out if there's cameras on them.
Or how they're going to use them
I think
in different ways.
it's one of the tools in the box to make the road networks and transport networks a hostile environment for travelling criminals.
Yeah. So, but yeah. Okay, so just going back, criminals don't have borders, so we shouldn't have borders, and that's what we're trying to achieve really, in that we're not going to put the brakes on when we get to that line, we're going to go over it and we'll deal with it. Which takes me nicely on to another video.
Fee, how long have we got?
I'll go past it, you can see all the
Can we?
legends.
Yeah, because it's just I
Conscious.
didn't get there,
Yes.
didn't get any time last time, so I'm not gonna. I've got to manage it today.
No worries. I mean, we have covered a lot anyway. I can go through, these are just some of the works that we do jointly, and obviously some of the results in Checkpoint, as I've said, 100 officers, 100 volunteers. The Fugo and the Meteor was to do with the 2-in-1s, which I've just said about getting those ones locked up last week, which was due to ANPR. Op Gauntlet, which is the 2 gentlemen at the bottom, not sure if that's the word, but the 2 lads there, distraction burglaries, huge operation using ANPR, again with training standards, resulting in them getting 9 years, so it was really effective.
Do training standards have routine access to ANPR, or is that on?
That's jointly with us.
Did they get it on request?
I don't know actually, I don't know.
We have an embedded officer within trading standards who acts as a link back in. So if they've got investigations ongoing in relation to jobbing builders or things of that nature, then as part of that investigation they can reach back into us and we provide appropriate support, whether it be analytical or intelligent.
Thank you. So this is just talking about how many organised crime groups. We've got approximately 50, again engaging in various crime types, and the bottom 4 is what we look at in terms of tackling organised crime. So to pursue, and that's basically disruption, disrupt their tactics, prevent them and divert the people away from getting involved. So that's working with our education and local authorities. Identify on through early partnerships to protect those people that may become involved in organised crime, as we know through county lines they're using a lot of vulnerable 14, 15-year-olds. And then the preparedness is having the capability and capacity to deal with it, so building that awareness in the communities. And we've said before, it's not just about drugs, it's people trafficking, forced labour, your car washes, your nail bars, people thinking that they owe that money, so then they're sort of tied into that group to then work for nothing, basically. This again covers, these are just the priorities, so again broken down. So the first three, that's all linked to vulnerability. The drug trafficking organised, that's about your commodity, your goods, your items, things that can be sold. And then the red is your prosperity, so the wealth, the money, the lifestyle that they want to have. And then county lines cuts across all of those because it involves a number of different ones. Again, we've said we work with trading standards. Most of the criminals, going back, they do use the roads in some form or another. And the Al Capone effect is, if it's got no insurance on it or there's no MOT, then it's another way for us to actually tackle that person. And particularly with economic crime, driving around in a Bentley that's paid for through fraudulent crime, we can take that car off them through poker, etc. Yeah. So there are other ways. That's just a quick look at what the role of the intelligence units are. So that's separate to the hub, but obviously they work very closely with the ANPR hub, and they will use ANPR to their utmost ability. But again, using Thrive as your risk assessment to actually look at what we need to target and look at. This is just to give you a bit of guidance that, we can't just go out and do what we want to do. We have got governance, we have got guidance that we have to follow. They're all on open source if people want to read them and look at them, which I'm sure they may want to do. But we do have standards that we have to adhere to.
I think that goes back to your point, Will, about do we just place the will in anywhere where we feel like, and absolutely not. There's all of the impact assessment work done, all the legislation's followed, and it's managed through our force authorising officers. So.
Yeah. On that front, it's something you might come at the end in terms of what's next. Given there's a sort of ethical sort of problem wrapped up in ANPR, are you comfortable with the numbers of cameras and where they're placed and all that kind of? Because obviously some are static and hard to move, others not so. But are you comfortable with the level of?
Yeah, we've changed. So we've got a number of statics. We've got a number of movable ones. So I have the ANPR implementation board. So again, we look at that as to what have we got, what do we need, where do we need to be putting them, and then obviously that all goes through the AO. With the increase in the vehicles, that will also assist as well. So at the moment, obviously, if you said to me there's another £1 million you can have more, then I'm going to say yeah. I
think for deployment as well, it's that we have to look at privacy impacts, we have to look at what's the policing purpose, we have to satisfy the surveillance commissioner. So the volume of cameras.
That's what I'm talking about balance. So the balance feels about right in the sense given you've got, if you had more cameras, you've got lots more work to do because you've got to go through that each time you're using them.
Well, I suppose it's giving the public the reassurance that if we asked you for another 100 cameras, it isn't just about saturating North Yorkshire with ANPR cameras. Each placement has to be based on intelligence and policing purpose. Yeah.
That's just a snapshot. That was December, so 55 arrests alone, just linked to ANPR. So again, looking at your additional arrests that we wouldn't have had that ANPR hit not. I mean, we might have got them another way, but ANPR was what's led us to those arrests, and there's just a few stories there.
And I think it was over 700 during last calendar
725 we've had in the since April last year. So that's
2 a day.
Really good. Yeah. The next one, this is just to give you a bit of reassurance. The corporate comms did a survey. It's just to show you that the public are actually supportive of ANPR in terms of policing. 59% of the 3,500 said that they felt reassured by the use of ANPR, and 88% said that the police need every tool. So it's just to give you that balance that they're actually encouraging the police to use it. And that's the figure there. So 36 vulnerable people that we've come across, whether that's missing from home, CSEs that have been within the vehicles.
And it's interesting, even it's not just criminality. So even as late as last week, we'd one of the patrolling officers had picked up a drink driver who was probably three times or more the limit. we had information around the car that was placed on the system. The car came up with a hit and we were able to deploy to that. Because in the daylight they'll walk out of a pub and see a police car nearby and then just walk away from the car. But we were on them within a matter of metres. So that's a fatality prevented potentially. So it goes to casualty reduction, it goes to multiple purposes, and it's not just necessarily straight up criminality or that sort of criminal vulnerability. There's lots of pleasant spin-offs that come as a consequence of having that capability at the extent we've got.
Yeah. You know, missing from homes that we've saved because we've got to them before they've managed to go and do any harm to themselves. So the future, improve in-car ANPR capabilities. So again, that's about increasing the cameras that are in our proactive vehicles. That's along with capital replacement and additional ones. We're moving to the national ANPR service, which basically is a big cloud-based ANPR, because the amount that hits, we need to have that storage and obviously that shared system. And then be ahead of the game, as I said right at the beginning. We want to be waiting for that ping rather than chasing it. So it's about building that better intelligence picture and making it a hostile environment. And that is me.
Thank you.
Sorry,
That was
probably
great.
overrun, but
Bang on. Absolutely bang on.
thank you.
Well managed.
Okay, great. Any further questions?
No, I might pick a couple of things outside, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fee, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
good job. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks for letting me go
Cheers.
first.
Right. Health and safety of the workplace.
Thank you. So our presentation this afternoon is about health and safety of the workforce within North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, and both myself and Lee will play a role in delivering the presentation. Thank you very much, Keir. So perhaps what we want to convey as part of this presentation is just an overview of our approach to health and safety and wellbeing within the workforce. What are our guiding principles and what sorts of resources do we have or we invested in health, safety and welfare for the workforce. So the first slide gives an overview of how we comply with the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Perhaps the first thing that we put a lot of time and effort into producing is a health and safety policy, and within that policy we have assigned roles and responsibilities very specifically to each function head and each section head within the organisation. For us as a corporate management board, a senior team, clear and positive safety leadership is something that we aim to do throughout our policy, and we aim to bring that to life throughout the organisation as well. And that's important to us because accountability is important, making sure that the people with the responsibility for health, safety and welfare take that seriously, and also recognition of the role that staff safety representatives play in terms of consultation with the unions and the representative bodies. And it's just perhaps worthy of note that we don't have the ROSPA accreditation now, but previously we've won the highest level, the Gold Award for the ROSPA in the emergency services sector. And as part of that, ROSPA made specific mention of our policy and the fact that it is robust and has accountability built within it as a positive factor. We don't currently have that accreditation now, we chose not to, but we have sort of previously in recent times had that accreditation.
Is there a reason you chose not to?
Cost and capacity really. We took a decision to reduce the health and safety team just on grounds of efficiency and cost. And the cost of maintaining the ROSPA accreditation, whilst it's very valuable and gives us a good degree of external accreditation, the time to service that and the cost of doing so was outweighed the benefits to us. So, yeah.
Next slide. So Kaz just talked about how we look at it from that corporate level and the policies that we have in place, but when that filters down through the organisation itself, we have a various amount of resources to make sure we're still adhering to that policy and how we do it. I myself am the section manager for the health and safety team. We have a dedicated role in that. We have a manager and a practitioner. We also train all our supervisory managers, so these are people like the crew managers and watch managers who are based on primarily on fire engines, to the Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the IOSH qualification, and then further up the organisation we then do the NYFRS qualification, so all managers will receive that. And we do also have in the non-uniformed support roles some staff equally trained in those areas. So
what does that qualification involve?
It's the recognised health and safety qualification. I think there's one currently running. It's been going on for I think 3 weeks.
Finished last Friday.
It just finished last Friday.
I joined them. Yeah.
And that's for the NYFRS, and I think the IOSH is a 4-day course. The IOSH is renewed every 3 years, and they do a 2-day refresher. And that's something that we monitor to make sure the qualifications are maintained at that supervisory manager level. We also have regional working groups that we're part of, so we can share best practice. We're currently looking at how we can do peer reviews with each other to make sure we're still maintaining a good standard. And obviously we've got the national working groups as well, where we can feed information from the centre and back into the organisation.
Can I ask a question then, Lee? So Carl slipped in there that the team's got smaller, I think. Now there's a financial context we're working in, which I understand, but what's changed? So how different is this team than it was a couple of years ago? What impact has that had? How have you managed to keep the same oversight and focus on it whilst producing?
I was involved in the review at the time, so the team had 2 health and safety practitioners, so people who go out and do the workplace audits and the proactive work, overseen by a station manager who was the sort of section head. At the time, the fitness testing and the sort of wellbeing agenda was gaining momentum, and we took the opportunity to take some resources out of the health and safety audit team, if you like, based on a low accident rate. In terms of done a lot of work in terms of getting the workforce trained, our station managers and our workplace supervisors trained to the standards that Lee mentioned earlier, so effectively devolving the responsibility for health and safety management out to the workplaces. But we invested that money into an exercise physiologist, and we enhanced the occupational health and safety nurses role at the time. So, and again, that's paid dividends, something I'll touch on a little bit further in the presentation around the wellbeing, fitness testing and rehabilitation, and that investment that we've sort of remade into getting people back into the workplace after they've suffered an injury.
So, to put it in another way, you sort of move the chess pieces. So you spent about as much on health and safety, just in a slightly different focus, a little bit on wellbeing and a slightly different way of approaching the same problem.
There was a net saving in terms of we reduced our occupational health nurses from 2 to 1. So there was a small net saving at the time, but in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, in terms of where we want to be targeting, we had very low accident rates and thankfully maintained those, in devolving some of that responsibility for health and safety out into the workplace. And investing that into rehabilitation and well-being effectively of the staff has proved a longer term gain to us.
I think it's also that investment that we had previously, to be able to get it to a really good standard, and we've been able to maintain that standard once it's been put in place. Next slide. So what that actually means when we talk about all those qualification things, so some of the specific tasks of health and safety managers and people who find themselves doing those roles are produce the policies and procedures, risk assessments in respect of health and safety matters. They also do training and advice in the workplace. We have to comply with the legislation. There's also recording of all the accidents and investigation of the accidents as well. So that could be from driver vehicle accidents to actual injuries to staff and personnel. And then we investigate those not just locally through the local management team, but also through the health and safety side as well. They carry out workplace safety inspections, deal with litigation cases brought against the service, and I say review the associated procedures in line with any agreed timescales. What that actually physically looks like is we have in place, we meet in the Health and Safety Subcommittee, and that is alternately chaired between myself and the rep bodies, And that's where we can discuss some of the issues that are brought together, review some of any actions that need to be looked at. That's then taken through to the main Health and Safety Committee group, where essentially it's confirmed and agreed what we've discussed in the previous meeting. And Corporate Management Board is where they undertake the accountability and the responsibility, and they can authorise whatever it is that we plan on doing. So an example of that, we've recently become aware of respiratory protective equipment everybody needs to be tested to make sure it all fits properly. So that was brought through to the Health and Safety Subcommittee, discussed around it, identified the equipment we need to make. That was then validated in the Health and Safety main group and then confirmed in Corporate Management Board. We've since been out and bought that piece of equipment, and we're looking at how we're now going to train staff to use it and how it's going to fit into essentially what will be when we come back for breathing apparatus training. Staff will also receive this test to make sure it complies with that new legislation.
And did that stem from a problem on the ground at some point?
It's more from what health and safety legislation has come out that we've been made aware of. So there are other mechanisms which we'll talk about later where there's problems that we look at. But it could well be, so for example, we've had firefighters, they have to go on regular training in container units for their breathing apparatus training, and on one instance somebody received quite a burn to their face, and we've identified that it was the flashers that they wear. So he'd worn it in the morning, it was wet with sweat, put it back on in the afternoon, and this is what caused the steam burn. So we've now identified from that all the flashers will be in the drying room at the lunchtime, so they wear once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and they're making sure that the flashers are dry for that second. So that was just one of the actions that we identified through that, and that's the process that we use to rectify that type of issue.
I think from sort of the strategic board level, having staff representatives alternately chair our committees, it really gives staff a voice, and it means that our staff representatives are able to influence the agenda, influence, again Lee's given us a good example there. There are many things that come up through from fire stations and workplaces around improvements and suggestions, and of course the whole ethos that we want to work towards is prevention of preventable accidents, and I think having that sort of voice from the shop floor, from the fire stations and workplace proves to be very valuable.
Do you do that in other spheres?
No, we don't know.
No. Might you?
If it was, it'd be something we could consider,
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's appropriate arenas for that approach to be taken, then it would be churlish not to. When you see the success of health and safety.
Yeah, I can see that being important to them, because I used to sit on the health and safety committees at the police, which I don't anymore, but it's where you got really, really good engagement from the Fed for policing in particular, because they are focused on the safety of their colleagues.
Well, another area, for example, where you tend to get very, very good engagement is around equality, diversity and inclusion. And that might be an area that would be worthy of exploration, at least, to see whether or not there's value in encouraging rep bodies or staff representatives to
it certainly demonstrates that transparency.
Certainly
that's what we use in those, what we call an adverse event, the safety event, where the rep bodies are immediately informed and they become part of that whole investigation process, and their contributions to it are seen as well.
Are they represented at each level?
So the Health and Safety Subcommittee, we alternate the chair, and then they attend the Health and Safety main group.
But that chair doesn't alternate?
No. And this is all, health and safety is a really good contributor to what we call organisational learning, and we have lots of mechanisms for organisational learning. So alongside the health and safety issues, we have a debriefing process embedded in the service. Incident debrief, cause for concerns, near miss, accident investigation, strands 26 is what we use as the terms, but essentially from my point of view is that centre point for organisational learning. We're not really concerned on how staff report it, we just want to make sure staff do that, and we have assured that staff will report any instance, whatever it may be. The main one in this is we have a very robust incident debrief system where incident types are automatically tagged, so that then promotes that the person who's in charge of the fire engine to submit a debrief form. There's a scoring mechanism on there that comes centrally and we monitor. So it's a mechanism where we can learn to improve on some of our how we attend incidents. An example of that is that we recently attended, it came in, we termed it as an animal rescue. When the crews turned up, there was a dog in open water with members of the public all insisting they were going to then enter the water and put themselves at risk. So from that we've learnt that we need to identify that as actually as a water rescue type incident, so we send a different type of resource. So the local crews turned up with their animal rescue equipment,
Sure.
and now they'll turn up with actually water rescue, so we can protect the crews better and also the members of the public.
Does that apply to the near misses and that kind of stuff where something almost happened?
Yes, and again, but it depends how what they're reporting. So it's something that we're aware of, and what my role is to make sure that we get back to the members of the staff. And we have seen a reduction in the number of reports we're receiving. I think that's probably on the back of the fact that now we've just started to close the circle. So things have been raised, we sort it out through the health, safety and our risk management group meetings, and then what we need to do now is report that back to staff, and that's what we've started doing.
That's one of the indicators that sounds counterintuitive, is that we like to see the reports coming through.
Yeah,
so
sure.
if it's a near miss, an adverse event, debrief form, lots and lots of those indicates a positive reporting culture, which we believe we have, and as Lee sort of mentioned there around, if we see a reduction, that generally means that people are satisfied, but we know that if there's an issue and staff aren't happy with something, that they use the processes to good effect.
We can also use that learning as well to identify what our training strategies are, so where we need to focus more. So we have the training that we have to do, and then we can revisit some areas again when we need to. We have also what we call national organisational learning and joint organisational learning. The national is essentially fire service centric, where nationally we'll share learning material, and we can put something on that site, and also we're told when there's something that needs to be looked at. And then joint organisational learning is essentially multi-agency incidents or learning. So you could think of the 2015 flooding, there was a big action plan from that, the Manchester Arena Kerslake report. You know, we've got learning from that, and that's what we do through the LRF, the Local Resilience Forum.
When it gets to that sort of strategic level learning, so the Kerslake report was yes, it was practical about deployment and stuff, but there's some cultural issues around that as well. How do you sort of try and get into the weeds of something that's less tangible than an appliance being faulty or something?
It is through that strategic buy-in. So there are lots of other groups alongside the LRF. There are blue light services. There's a lot more collaboration between the three services as well. There's the Yorkshire Humber Operational Response Group. So they're talked at all those levels. We also have a joint JESIP training for that interoperability. So it's just ongoing work that we're doing all the time to improve those working relations.
And without wanting to bring Grenfell into it, but there are other occasions where someone's learning as someone else's. We did that perfectly fine. It was an outcome that we couldn't have avoided. So Grenfell, was the stay put policy right or not? And there are different views as to whether that advice should have changed earlier or not. Do you sometimes get these really difficult ones where it's just a difference of opinion as to whether it's a health and safety problem or a policy problem or something that you disagree with? I don't know.
So sometimes firefighters do depart from their procedures, don't they? Because they're faced with the situation upon which they have to make a judgment.
Yes.
So how do you? When do these sort of things happen, and how do you sort of learn and monitor from them and sort of update whatever it is you need to update?
What we have is we've got an operational discretion procedure where the circumstances in front of our fire officers are so different and unique that we must act, and this is based on learning from a few years ago where a member of the public did actually die. I think it was in Scotland, and who needed rescuing, and people couldn't agree what to do because it didn't fit into any sort of policy or procedure.
Yeah.
So as long as they identify that they are stepping out of our normal procedures, they've done their own risk assessment as to what they're going to do, and they've explained their decision making, they can then continue. And then what we will do is evaluate that in a non-critical manner, but in how they came to that decision and how we can learn from it.
Just to bring that alive as well, in terms of we have a policy, of how to step outside policy, which sounds again counterintuitive. But to bring that alive to our...
So we had lots, the police had lots of policies. That's a policy about a policy.
And it is based on, as Lee sort of described, the operational discretion element of that. Now, we give input, the senior team go and give input to all initial commanders around what that means in terms of bringing, you're faced with a decision that you have to take. There is no real good outcome for this, but we're going to have to take a risk in order to save a life. And it's important to us to make sure that as the senior team we convey to our commanders that if they take decisions under those circumstances they will be supported, provided they're not reckless and that they make their decisions for the right reasons. So the policy is one element of it. Bringing it to life is something we do on all of our initial command courses and refreshers. The real aim for that is to make sure that our commanders, the people that are taking those decisions within the first 10 minutes of an incident, can do so without fear and actually do the right thing.
Yeah.
So all our commanders receive an annual update and a biannual assessment, and this is the opportunity that they're brought together and we can give them real life experiences of decisions that have been at various different types of incidents, so again to get their knowledge and understanding of managing incidents improved and developed.
So Phil, do you have anything like that in the police? Because you always get the one that people always cite is people are in some water and everybody stands on the banks and doesn't go in to get them. That's the one that people...
Yeah, well we have the health and safety board that does review around some of these things. So I think the element for us is, so for example, the waterborne safety resulted in us putting together a specific package.
But you don't have a policy to agree that you're going to go outside the policy. I can see why you would have that. I'm not being facetious about it. I completely see why you would have that.
We don't have that specific policy because I think what we do is we use a national decision model.
Okay,
and
right.
At the centre
so
of that, I would say, is actually if your decision is to go outside of policy and you've rationalised it using the NDM, then the individuals will be supported in relation to that. So there's no specific policy to do it, but we encourage it through the training of the national decision.
We're in effect we're sort of boundless in terms of constraints around whether we act or not. So we would reflect back to common law in terms of duties and then human rights legislation and similar, whereas as I understand it, fire and rescue services, you've got legislation which puts you into being, which creates the framework for your activity, and then different orders that come around that. So for us, the legislation and the policy only ever overlays what does common law say. So if common law says you ought to do it for the greater good, then we would expect officers to follow that path.
Yeah. And I think an example for us would be if for the waterborne again, you're looking at Article 2 issues in saving life, then our officers might forego policy in order to preserve life, to carry out one of the core policing duties. So that would be a decision that we would say would be for them to take at that point in time. And
so you've got different processes to get there, but ultimately it's the same outcome, isn't it?
It's an interesting point. We base our command decision making on the joint decision making model, which forms part of our policy. So we are operating on the same lines. It's just training the decision makers at that time, and this brings in the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Programme, the JESIP principles of joint situation awareness and joint decision making.
And interesting enough, in something like water rescue, there's then a survivability model which was created within the National Operational Guidance Programme for Fire, but in conjunction with JR-CALP, which is the ambulance procedures, and the police. And it's a survivability model that dictates the circumstances in which somebody may or may not still be alive who is face down in water. So for example, anybody will be classed as being survivable up to 30 minutes. Beyond that, it depends, for example, on the temperature of the water or the age of the person. But all of the agencies can make a sensible, risk-based decision on whether or not to take action that might sit outside normal procedures because of survivability. However, we wouldn't expect anybody to take actions outside our procedure to rescue somebody who is clearly not survivable. We would wait until the appropriate resources have arrived so it can be done with a full safe system of work in place.
So it's a recovery as opposed to a rescue.
Exactly. So we take a really balanced approach based on the survivability of the casualty and the risk, the hazards to the personnel and the available equipment that they've got to try to recover that person.
So going on from that, obviously this learning, we need to share it around the organisation. We talked about how we use it to identify parts of our training strategy as well. And then it could be something just as simple as bulletins that we release to staff. So we often are releasing regular updates on latest information and reminders as well. We do that for seasonal issues such as how we have our on-call element who are responding from home in winter, to be mindful of the road conditions, what they might be facing, and not slipping and tripping on the drill yard as they cross it to attend any calls. What we also do is we have a schedule of audits that we take at the workplace, and again that's done in collaboration with the rep bodies. We've got a proactive operational assurance audit, and that's a 3-year schedule where the Ops Assurance Manager will visit every location and it is audited, and part of that is their health and safety, their GDPR stuff, how they record, how they train, making sure that they're doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. And it's a standard template. We observe some training, we have some Q&A, and we use again topical themes. A couple of years ago I had some new breathing apparatus procedures, so we use that opportunity to test part of that. We're currently looking at our initial operational response, so that if our crews are all aware of that, and see if that training's been embedded within the service as well. As I said earlier, we have the adverse safety events that we investigate. I mentioned about the firefighter receiving the burn. We've had an incident with a breathing apparatus cylinder top hatting, which essentially is over tightening, so this caused a restriction in the flow, and we're currently investigating that along with the manufacturers and also with the rep bodies as well, and we have an action plan in place to resolve that issue.
So when I was down at Morton in the March,
Yes, yeah.
I saw a high busy bit of kit being used around breathing apparatus. So in North Yorkshire, it's manual still.
Oh, the entry control procedures.
Is that what it is? Yes. Do we? Where are we with that in North Yorkshire?
Yeah, we still use a manual system.
Right.
So that is sort of the more traditional, but it's still a recognised safe system of work. I'm guessing that the equipment you saw was telemetry, which effectively has a radio link between the entry control board and it monitors air consumption and expected time out of the wearer. That's technology that's available, it's been available for some time, but we use the more traditional sort of manual method.
Okay, so I don't like the word traditional in the context of safety. I tend to like the word modern in the context of safety.
But it's proven.
It is a manual system, and it does. But we train very, very hard, and we make sure that we instill the procedures into our staff. The BA telemetry equipment would enhance safety. It would. It certainly would be a benefit, but it is very costly in terms of purchase and sort of rollout of that equipment, which is why the service hasn't implemented it today.
Because being a scuba diver, I know the big difference from the old manual system to the nice modern computer system, and I feel a lot safer with my computer stuck on my wrist.
Yeah.
I think at the last public accountability meeting in another fora, I've talked about the lack of investment in modern technology within North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service over a long time. This is a prime example of it. We have a safe system of work. It's a recognised, proven safe system of work, but it could be enhanced, and the safety of our firefighters could be enhanced by the provision of that type of equipment. And that's exactly the type of investment that I would like to see us be able to make sufficient savings elsewhere to be able to make. Because by virtue of the fact that it is available, that it's been proven in many other fire and rescue services to be effective and it enhances safety, I think it's almost compliant upon us to start to look at that type of investment when we can afford to do so. We almost can't afford not to do so, however, as time progresses, because the longer that we haven't got it, of course, the longer that we haven't got the maximum level of safety for our firefighters, despite we have
a good standard,
a good standard already, but it could be better.
On a practical sense, from your subcommittee to your group to your board, would the subcommittee start recommending new equipment or modern ways of doing things, or would issues come up from the subcommittee to the board to the group corporate board, and then you go, do you know what, we've seen enough of these to think we've got to act in a different way or purchase a new type of equipment. Where do the recommendations come from?
It'll come from both ways. I mean, for example, we use hydraulic cutting equipment. I don't know which direction it came in, but the cutting equipment for road traffic collisions. It used to be very heavy individual pieces of equipment with hydraulic oil and a big engine, and now the battery operated, more portable. But we identify pieces of equipment like that across the whole range of fire service activity, and it can come through the health safety at the bottom or at the top.
So how do you learn from others then?
Well, it could be through national organisational learning. I mean, we're active all the time with our regional partners. We are attending the National College, so you become aware of what's current, and you identify things yourself as well. So we'll look at everything. We have equipment evaluation teams. We encourage the workforce to be part of that, so it's not just officers who are leading these groups. We're trying to incorporate the whole workforce into being part of it. So there will be some people who, line rescue for example, who will be part of that team because they've got a personal interest in it. So it can come from a 360 degree angle. It's just once it comes, we need to try and channel it through appropriate systems to make sure we monitor it and we assess it and evaluate it and decide a way forward or onward.
An example of that is the introduction of tactical response vehicles, the TRVs. When we specified the equipment on those vehicles, staff had a real influence in the specification, and again at the time the authority took the decision to buy the highest level of equipment we could for those vehicles, and the electronic cutting gear is one that staff are keen on. And again, as a result of that, evaluating that, we're now rolling it out as part of our wider stock. So continual evaluation is what we do, and we do have a good standard of equipment on our appliances, notwithstanding the BA1003 issue.
So just on about that organisational and the other areas that we were looking at, we were talking about with the risk assessments that we complete. We have a risk management group. The risk management subgroup works very closely where some of these items are identified through incident debriefs or reporting. It's generally that risk group that will send it to our response and resilience team to identify a solution. We do have to obviously report specific data to government, such as RIDOR.
What?
RIDOR, which is the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences regulations costs. Any injury over 3 days needs to be reported, and then there's certain breaks of bones and all the way up to fatality in the workplace. What we have next is just an example of the type of statistics we might be reporting. So there you can see from 2013 some of the accident statistics we've had with our fire engines, on blue lights, off blue lights, and some of the accidents to our personnel on duty. And it's just to say that for every one of those collisions or accidents there will have been a full investigation carried out with some sort of remedial action taken afterwards.
Does it get as in depth as amount of accidents per minute of blue light working? So for example, if you're on blue lights half the time that you were in 2013, you'd expect to see half the number of accidents, and this if you've got less personnel now than you did in 2013, you'd expect to see less personal accidents. Do you get into that kind of depth to know so for road safety it's crashes per 1,000 miles travelled rather than just overall, because numbers of cars are going up all the time?
I can't say we look at it like that.
Not in that detail, no.
We're not able to at the moment because again we haven't got the technology to monitor those journeys, but that technology does exist. So again, it's something that at some future point we might consider. It's called telemetry, putting a technological box of tricks into every vehicle that monitors the type of driving it's doing, whether it's under blue lights or not, the distances that it's travelling, the times of day, the weather conditions, lots of different things, who's driving it. So there is technology available that would allow us to investigate to that level of detail. That said, when you look at the number of vehicle accidents that we suffer relatively low given the number of miles that our vehicles do every year. And it's that balance of is that the best place to invest scarce funding, or is there somewhere else to invest it which will have a greater impact on safety?
And you could say as well, if drivers are attending less calls, or they could becoming less experienced, or they become blasé, and so there's a whole range of
but that might
reasons.
impact on, then you do more training because actually you're spending less time doing the actual. So that's and it might not be worthwhile because that can be quite complicated for not a huge gain. But I asked the question just because when you've got low numbers, which you've got, which is good, it can be quite nuanced as to there's other reasons for the low numbers changing sometimes.
Just on the driving side of things, the Driving for Better Business is a Department of Transport Highways England initiative, and we are used as a case study as best practice within there, and looking at the numbers of reduction in appliances on blue lights, off blue lights, we are recognised within there. So it's just interesting around that point there, around our whole approach to driver training and the way that we review every collision, every accident. And again, perhaps if we look in 2013, 28 appliances off blue lights, the majority of those were attributed to low speed manoeuvring, and we put an awful lot of effort into making sure that we put safe control measures in to make sure that invested in that in terms of training and built it into the driver training, which I will say has seen a reduction, nearly half, and that's sort of reflected within the Driving for Better Business case study that we've reviewed it this year, and it still stands in terms of our accident reduction, our contribution to road safety in being ambassadors of sort of road safety out there on the road, as well as our strategic sort of our policies, procedures, and the way that we have our driving management. So just an interesting.
So my question also, Carl, was it was the 21 and 2013 a blip, or did you do something to deal with that, like you did with, as you've just described?
We did. We revised. I think when we looked at the numbers, particularly in 2013, again I was involved with that. We looked at the causation of those, and we amended our response driving policy.
Right.
To drive to arrive was our sort of strapline, and we introduced stat categories of response, 1, 2 and 3 in terms of immediate life risk. You may proceed, with a degree of urgency, but if you are responding to, for example, an animal rescue, yes, there's an urgency, but the driver will be very aware of the risk that were presented in terms of driving on blue lights. So, and again, that was built into our driver training packages, and we'd like to think that's contributed towards the reduction in accidents that we've had.
And people are more aware. So, for example, when accidents do happen, such as the dink of a wing mirror, the driver has to submit the report, and it may well be subject to a half-day refresher training, or there are certain questions that get sent out to them, and I think it's a good kind of an incentive to other drivers, again, to just be more vigilant, particularly with those slow speed manoeuvres. I think that's part of probably what's happened there as well. In relation to we talked earlier on about our managers and the training they have. All our staff, including non-operational staff, have access to e-learning modules. We use a system called LearnPro, and it covers a really broad range of topics. Obviously, a lot of those are fire related, but there's some mandatory health and safety modules on there.
I can imagine your answer, Lee. Is LearnPro good? Because in policing there's a lot of feedback about the version
There's feedback in the fire rescue service too.
Right.
Yes and no. It's improving all the time. There is sometimes issues on-call stations of access. So when you've got 8, 9, 10 people turning up to train, there may be only 1 or 2 IT stations that they can actually use to do it, and with a very limited amount of time. Some of the systems run videos and other systems don't, so you can't hear the sound. So, and then again, we can run reports from it as well, but it's the improvement of the reporting system of it. So we are aware of it. That's where we know we're at with it.
Is there are they nationally produced? What is LearnPro? Is it like does every fire rescue service in the country have it?
I think there's various ones around the country. We purchased LearnPro some time ago, and there are a number of services that use it, and we rebadge each other's. So once we've agreed what's going on there, we'll just borrow West Yorkshire's and rebadge it with the North Yorkshire, but there are sometimes slight nuances between the services. So we have a team of people at the training centre whose part of their role is just to update and to maintain them.
I think it's worth saying that, Andrew made reference to the national operational guidance. All of our training packages are aligned to the national operational guidance to make sure that, again, we might have slightly different takes on, each service may well have a different take on the risk in their area, but ultimately we are training to the same level, and where there's a national training package produced, we will use that.
So I'm sit on the National Fire Standards Board, and we're just looking at where we should start to develop standards, and presumably then any new standards that are developed could have quite a big impact on these packages.
And that's part of the workload at the moment, is when the operational guidance is published, we have to then
That's
turn it
different to
into
the NOG.
To the standards, so it's interesting you raise that, because I used to work in the National Operational Guidance Programme and design and development of it. I listened to a presentation about the National Standards Body at the LGA conference 2 weeks ago, and it's being established along very similar lines to the National Operational Guidance.
Yes, it is.
So
it's
those
the same
two,
team,
it is. So those two aspects of future fire service work will be very closely aligned.
I suppose that I'm just thinking is in the future, is there going to have to be a big update of these e-learning modules? And if so, is that an opportunity for us to look at actually getting one that is a little bit more modern and a bit better? If there's changes coming down the line?
I don't know the answer to that, but
I'd welcome. I think we would
it would be
certainly
a national
review.
approach.
We'd certainly look at what's available. I think if there's an opportunity, then absolutely.
Bear that in mind.
There are some systems that we provided with that do get an element of support by the suppliers, and then it's a bit of a self-maintenance program.
I know that that's when we start getting
it's
problems, isn't it?
And as e-learning becomes more customary to people, as more younger people enter the service, it will become the norm to do e-learning. It will no longer appear to be something quite alien compared to the way that people learned and developed in the past. So I would expect that the system would improve, but I would also expect that people would become more accustomed to that.
Well, every
style of
17-year-old has to do their driving test like that.
We have a wide spectrum of people that who are their abilities on the IT, but for example, the on-call element, there are people who are not that happy, shall we say, using it, but they do it as a team. You see, so the crew or watch manager will deliver the input, and then so everybody gets the input. So it's not always down to that individual to be on.
We certainly had some feedback on some stations around it.
I'd be interested to hear what that feedback is, because if there's learning that we can take from that, I would be keen to do it.
I think it's a lot of it is down to people sort of, as you describe, people feeling their comfort, if you like, around that type of environment.
And then sometimes I think that there's an opportunity taken, because if somebody is working in the farming community, farmers use computers as much as more than anybody else. I mean, they're on their tractors, they're in their equipment, they're in their farms, they've got to record every item of livestock, every animal, it's used all the time. Those are skills that are very easily transferable into the sort of IT that we use. So I think as IT use becomes broader, I think it will just become normal in the fire and rescue service. The equipment and the systems will improve, and it won't even be an issue.
I think it's interesting as well in terms of broadband quality does have an impact as well. So in some of our more rural stations, Lee mentioned around some of the videos that are embedded into these training packages, that's problematic, and that's again something that's perhaps a little wider than the platform that we use. So.
I know that.
So from that, and that's part of my work as well, is monitoring the expiry dates, so people are they undertake the module, and then there is an expiry date on those, but more importantly it's the health and safety modules, and now monitor the compliance with that. We have risk critical training that's delivered through our training centre. There's a programme in place, and there are periodical needs for our staff to attend, and there's an operational licence that firefighters hold. It's usually an incident command, breathing apparatus, driving, and again that's monitored and reported on. On our next slide, what we see is our operational competence, which is specifically for firefighters, is we talked about NOGs, we've got national occupational standards, and we've got these 9 areas of core competence which need to be maintained. And this is essentially which is managed on staff and through attendance at training centre. So as you see there, driving, incident command, breathing apparatus, hazardous material, working at height, water rescue, fire service pumps, extrication rescue, casualty care, and all that again fits in with health and safety with the provision of work equipment, manual handling.
So I've got a question on this. So if you're assuring operational competence, obviously you've got roughly half your workforce who are on call, some of which don't get called out terribly often. It must be a sort of continuous challenge to make sure, a bit like with special constables, whether they've got the operational experience that they need to keep them sort of competent all the time. How do you manage that?
That is the role of the fire service, and always has been essentially. Is preparing our staff for when they're needed, and the activity varies. So they're not. They do regular training. They attend courses, so the safety to command will show them essentially the basics of training, and then when they're on station, they're training all the time on various themes and topics. And the maintenance programme is set so it is achievable over certain periods of time. However, we are aware that there may be more rural stations that don't get turned out as often, and that how you remember what incidents you've been to and how you can use those principles at the next incident that you attend, that isn't there because they have less experience. So it's more about continual training with the incident commanders, maintaining that safety and them to oversee what's going on at incidents. Something as simple as a car fire at the side of the road, making sure they're aware of other road users and protecting the staff.
So what proportion of your staff at the moment have some form of outstanding training requirement? Because I know there's been issues around ASOS and all of the rest of it in regards to that, haven't there?
Well, we've taken steps to address that, and actually the picture now in terms of, if we looked at the areas there, the operational competence, they're the areas that we base our training around. In terms of our operational licence, which are the absolute risk critical skills that we will take people off operational duties for, very low numbers, generally less than 5% of staff will be out of date, but they will generally be out of date for a good reason. They'll either be on a return to work programme, or they'll be on sick leave or some other reason why so all of our operational staff comply with our operational licence. Some of the wider skills that you mentioned there around the immediate emergency care training and the aerial ladder platform training that were affected by the industrial action, we've now taken steps to get that and the water rescue training, and now we've got a significant proportion of our staff trained, and we took a targeted approach to that to get in those. So the exact figures for outstanding I haven't got, but it's very small numbers, less than sort of 20%.
Because that was an issue a while ago. So it'd be if you, outside of this, then if you could just provide me with some reassurance around that, that'd be helpful.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks.
I presume there's only so much you can do. Well.
We've got 7 minutes.
Oh, okay. Do you know, I won't ask them.
Maybe one more time.
Yeah.
Happy to discuss that with you. Okay, a few more slides in. Staff wellbeing. We have made a significant investment in staff wellbeing, both in physical and mental health for our staff. I did mention earlier that we have a dedicated health and wellbeing team, which is overseen by an occupational health and safety nurse and an exercise physiologist. We invested in a dedicated rehabilitation suite, which mirrors the facilities at the Firefighters Charity Rehabilitation Suite, so that when people come from Firefighters Charity, which is something that staff will access if they've got specific needs, we can carry on and rehabilitate them quickly back into the workplace. That's also got fitness testing facilities within there. We've also invested and maintained an employee assistance programme, so the big part of that is the confidential counselling helpline and access to a qualified counsellor 24 hours a day. We can also get staff access to speedy physiotherapy, again to sort of facilitate a timely response back to work. And for us, we signed the Mind Blue Light Pledge and Action Plan back in 2016, and that's been a real focus for us in terms of delivering mental health awareness and support to staff, removing some of the barriers, potential barriers that staff may have in terms of accessing support for mental health, which has been a real focus for us over the past few years.
Quick question. So I was at the Unison AGM last night, and of course Unison now covers both. It's the same branch for both the fire rescue service and the police service. There were quite a lot of questions from Unison members there around support and whether or not the fact that they are now one branch, whether that means there is opportunities between the two services to look at health and wellbeing support in a more collaborative way. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it was raised at the Unison AGM last night, so we'll just table that and think about it. Whether,
when you look down the list, it resonates with the police service.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are lots of synergies there.
Yeah.
And we were talking this morning about shared IT systems that, and the ability to report in a common manner, then I think the answer is it's very, very worthy of further investigation.
Yeah.
And we've already offered our fitness, our rehabilitation suite, and it has been used by police colleagues on return to work as well. So,
has it?
Yeah, early talks that were last year.
Okay, that would have been right for because there's so obviously Unison are not police officers; they're police staff.
Yeah.
And so it was in the context of them not having access to police treatment centre.
Yeah.
And whether or not there's alternatives around all of that. So that would be really interesting.
I think it'd be worth getting to occupational health departments to
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's where the practical collaboration's already taken place, hasn't it, with some of the facilities you've got at Thirsk with the workshops there. So that's on a much more informal basis with officers, but I mean I think it's absolutely valid that we extend that across to staff colleagues, now that Unison are in play.
And the mental health training would be an obvious one. The other thing I just want to say, I did drop in on, I think it was Mental Health Awareness Day at Harrogate Police Station when they'd sort of done an open door, Harrogate Fire Station, they'd done an open doors thing. It was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. I was only going to go for half an hour, but ended up being there for 2 hours, and everybody was sharing all of their stories. It was really excellent.
Yeah, and that was replicated. There was a few others across the county as well.
Yeah, it was really good.
Again, it just shows, I think, for us in terms of that was led by our occupational health and safety nurse and a firefighter at Lancaster.
Yeah.
And it was very positive. Yeah,
it was. It was really good.
I think you're going to come on to sort of the improvements you've seen in sickness as a result of some of this work. Have you, again, it's difficult and expensive sometimes to measure this stuff, but have you seen or felt any better engagement? So often, just the investment in staff then is reflected in their commitment to work and all those kinds of things.
I think we've certainly tried to remove all the barriers, and we're working hard to remove all the barriers, and that it applies to our specialists, our support staff as our operational staff. So in terms of support is for all, access is for all, and I think we've tried really hard to champion that and remove the barriers, and one of which, particularly for mental health, is the stigma associated with accessing help, and we've tried really hard from the senior level down to make sure that staff know that. Days like the Time to Talk days are really important for us to do that. So yes, we have, and the feedback we've had is really positive. Yeah.
And that's throughout the organisation. I was recently, yesterday morning, I was at York doing a station visit, and we spoke about why and how the workplace should be a supportive environment for people, a sanctuary for them if they're facing an awful lot of life stressors. It shouldn't be adding to those life stressors, and their colleagues are a support network for them, and that's what our workplaces should always be. So, I mean, these are daily conversations that are going on around the organisation.
I think just in terms of, did some research 3 years ago around are staff aware of the support that's available to them, and the response was 80% of staff were. But oddly, the biggest, well not oddly, but very common across the country is that barrier to accessing that is people's perception of that they may be weak, or that there's a stigma attached to accessing mental health, which we're trying really hard to overcome.
I think if we can join the two cultures together, it may support both organisations there. For those individuals that feel actually there's a stigma to it, they can see actually that stigma is being removed by both the police service and the fire service.
And it's really important that senior officers are seen to support that, because they've certainly got experience in the past of headquarters not being deemed a suitable venue for occupational health services, because people would have to come to the big house, potentially be seen by senior officers as though that's going to be some sort of a criticism of them or some sort of a weakness, as Carl says. And so it's really important that everybody throughout the organisation says, no, our mental and our physical health are essential for us to be effective in the workplace, and we'll do everything to support people to make sure that those two aspects of their life are well catered for.
So, building on that then, our priority has been to develop a supportive culture and use the feedback to inform our next steps. We've done that through a staff survey recently, and by talking to staff, considering the impact of any decisions we've made, and making sure that staff understand the reasons for decisions and understand where they can get support. That was featured in our staff survey, in that staff recognise that we do have a positive welfare, health and safety culture, but however we've got no room for complacency. We want to build on that, we want to make sure that we're as strong as we can be in that area, and that's underpinned by our commitment to both physical and mental health. Just perhaps to illustrate that, this slide just gives an illustration of some of the number of occurrences that we have. And if you look, you sort of use national benchmarking as a backdrop to that. We've maintained between the 3rd and 5th lowest sickness rates throughout fire rescue services in the country for the past 3 years, which has been really positive. And we're aiming to maintain this position and improve it. It's a really positive indicator in terms of our staff commitment in getting back to work, but also the support hopefully that we provide to staff. And in particular, mental health issues nationally in the fire and rescue service account for anywhere between 30 and 20% of all absences. And within North Yorkshire, they are as low as 13% currently at the moment using those figures. We view that really positively, but again, no room for complacency, and I think our key message is staff accessing support for mental and physical health issues is really important to us. And again, on that slide there, for that particular period, the national average was 3.71 days lost to sickness. In North Yorkshire, it maintained 3.37, which is an indicator that we keep a close eye on.
Do you think mental health is underreported there then?
In North Yorkshire?
Generally, not just in North Yorkshire, because you've got musculoskeletal.
If I use us as an example, Julia, I think traditionally we were in the same sort of place as the fire service. The work that we've been doing, and certainly nationally as well as the police service, around mental health awareness has seen this flip on its head. So actually now mental health related illnesses, number one, and musculoskeletal, number two. We also found that a lot of musculoskeletal were hidden mental health. So I think there was some real benefits and challenges to the work that you're describing there. And actually one of the indicators we saw was that mental health will rise and rise in terms of where it sits on the table.
It's also important to remember that the people least likely to come forward are men in their 20s, 30s and 40s in terms of the mental health, and then the flip to that is the greatest sort of suicide risk is in that same age group, same demographic. So when you look traditionally at firefighters, male dominated, and then the military, male dominated, you get much, it's not unrealistic to anticipate the level of reporting to be low. And I suppose as the police and agencies diversify further, we might see improved reporting and self-awareness to come through.
It's an interesting point. It hasn't always been that low. At one point, 40% of our long-term sickness was attributed to mental health. So we have seen that come down in terms of the figures that you see there. So it wasn't always low. And again, it's one of those indicators that 40% is high, but it means people being honest about why they're off, and hopefully we've been able to help them. But I must add, absolutely no room for complacency with that one, and we've got to keep the conversation going on in particular mental health.
That's one more just on the back of it. So on the musculoskeletal thing, that was, I remember some of our leadership day presentations, is stress, and which manifests in a bad back or whatever. And most stress at work is line management related. Have you done? Are there any sort of leadership type programs and line management programs that are part and parcel of this, without necessarily being badged as well-being when it's leadership sometimes, but it does have an impact on the well-being of the workforce?
Perhaps thanks for that. Allied to that, we've delivered last year and the year before and developed a programme of supervisory management courses, if you like, run by ACAS around managing ill health, absence, looking out for the signs of that stress may manifest itself, having difficult conversations with people, you know, appropriate appraisals, unconscious bias training, and mental health training as well. So we've delivered a suite of 5 or 6 different courses to our supervisory managers over the last 2 years, and up to the sort of middle and strategic level as well. We do run programs for our leaders to build on that. So it's a really good point and something that we've built into this kind of strategy for like work going forward to complement that. So going forward then, we have some fairly simple aims. We want to maintain our low level of ill health, absence and accidents. However, we do want it to be reported accurately so that we can get the most appropriate assistance to people. We want to build on our reporting structures, particularly important at the moment, I think, between the two organisations, to make sure that we do have meaningful reports and meaningful data coming out. Continue to learn. Both Lee and I touched on some of the national learning that goes on, some of the regional learning and organisational learning that goes on. And perhaps the next step for us is to increase the number of mental health champions within the workplace to make sure that, you know, peer support is there for people, so we can provide support mechanisms as an organisation. But again, our research shows that a preference for staff is peer support as well, so that's something that we're focusing on going forward.
Have you got willing cohort there to be mental health champions?
Yeah, people have come forward. You've already made tentative inquiries about that, so yeah, we have, which again is really positive. So yeah, so thank you.
I think there are any questions, haven't we? Unless anybody's got any more. Okay, great, thank you. So, I think it's over to you, Andrew.
The Corporate Management Board response to the baseline report.
No, the performance.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about performance. I'm not going to present data. The data that I presented last month to this meeting is quarterly updated within the Fire and Rescue Service. So I'd be giving you exactly the same data again. However, next month what will be presented to this meeting is the full year's performance from 2018 to 2019, April to March. That will be presented, as I say, next month. What we'll seek to provide as well, as best we can, is information on our performance as a fire and rescue service in terms of our service delivery, our prevention, protection and response services. And what we've got at the moment is fire and rescue service officers working with your own team within the Office of Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner Julia to develop a more nuanced and useful set of performance indicators for future meetings. The most important element of that is that it will allow us to prioritise our work and begin to demonstrate the causal impact between what we do and the ultimate outcome, which is the safety of the people in North Yorkshire and the number of incidents that we respond to and the impact that they have. So no new data today, full year's data next month, and then work underway to make sure that the data that we're able to present, the information we can share in the future is more useful and more about the fire and rescue service as opposed to the performance of the public, as we discussed last month.
Okay, brilliant. Fantastic. So then, Phil, I think it's
Okay.
Kieran.
Me, I think, yeah. I think we'll, hopefully the police data pack will come up here on the screen just now. So if I take us to just slide 3 and give a quick overview, if I may, in relation to mental health activity, which is a key issue for us around vulnerability. You'll see that we're relatively steady in relation to numbers of incidents and proportion of those set against our total demand, and probably the most interesting piece in relation to the bottom of slide 3 is in relation to the detentions. You'll see we're still at relatively low numbers, but we have had the first one that we can identify as being a direct result of a lack of a health-based place of safety bed available to us. So that's the first one that we picked up. So that'll
Where was that?
I couldn't tell you which one it was actually, which custody area, but I can find that out and get that across to Will. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful. So we're having ongoing discussions with the CCG and TUV about the implications of their various closures. They are approaching us to fund additional services I think, to fill the gaps left by those closures, which seems somewhat odd that the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner should be paying for what arguably is called mental health services. But anyway, so we will take those discussions on. I've raised it as a risk earlier at EB, and we'll bring it. So any data that you have, Karen, will be very helpful feeding into that.
Yeah, no problem. We'll pass that, and
Thank you.
Also I'll pass we'll pass some information across. We're starting to pick up a small number of incidents where our officers, although they are taking people to the health-based place of safety, it's in Middlesbrough or Darlington.
Right.
So we had an incident a couple of weeks ago of an officer of officers taking somebody from York to Darlington because of availability of beds and so on. So we'll do some work through the partnership hub and feed that in there. So
that'd be really helpful. Because they haven't got enough facilities at York, and they're not building enough facilities in the new hospital.
Yes, but this is partly where Mark Bates is focused on sort of time it takes rather than just sheer numbers and volume is helpful. So he'll start picking up the length of time it's taking to transport those detainees up to that neck of the woods rather than.
And I think given the nature of the detainee, it will be two officers.
Yes, it will.
As well. It's not a single officer task.
But what we'll need to do some work in the background, which we absolutely will get done, to pick that up, because actually taking them to a health-based place of safety is seen as a win from the police perspective, because they're not going into cells and all those kinds of things. And yes, we are transporting, or we may be accompanying an ambulance to transport, but then one of the knock-ons for us is that the officer goes into an unfamiliar environment, isn't necessarily aligned to the business processes at each of the hospitals. So as a consequence, could be there for longer than they need to be. So we need to sort of play that through. And I'm aware of some really strict and strong protocols between Cleveland Police and South Tees, and South Tees James Cook and South Tees the TUV venue there, Rosebery Park. But our officers won't be cited on that, so won't necessarily know which buttons to push to escalate the response within health to enable them to be released more quickly. So there's some work, cross-border work for us to do to understand the full impacts of that, but we'll feed through what we can to assist in terms of broader discussions.
Okay. Great, thank you.
So if I may, I'll move to slide 4, and I think that just sort of echoes the position for us. We're obviously starting to present that information in terms of the length of time officers spend engaged in mental health-based incidents.
So we're gonna, if that becomes a feature of detention, is the review that means it's less likely to get an ambulance to take?
Well, because it's out of area.
Exactly.
It's not Yaz. It's not Yaz anymore, is it?
No, if they pick up from sort of Harrogate, York, etc., the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, and then potentially, so we'll need to think about whether they become less inclined to support. I mean, that's pure conjecture. I'd hazard a guess. I'd like to say that they would do it because they would have been deployed to the event, and it's only at the point at which the person needs transporting that it becomes clear that they can't take them to, facility A versus facility B. And at that point,
they're not going to drop back off and wait for Darwin to north.
And I think the key issue here is that if they are deemed to be required to go through Section 136 for a formal assessment, the street triage is not going to be able to do that formal assessment. They are still going to have to go to the places of safety to have that assessment carried out.
So the other thing that is concerning, because we had done better with ambulance, hadn't we? And now we're back to half and half again.
It was 18.
Yeah.
4 or something last time.
Yeah, I think we've got to monitor that and see whether that's a blip, because I think when you look at the reasons why there was a joint risk assessment between ambulance and police for 8 of those, so we need to understand whether there was specific levels of violence or otherwise in relation to that, and have we had a blip in that month, because I think there has been some
good work. Yeah.
So I think we just need to be mindful that might be a blip, and maybe look at this again next month and see if that's changed.
I think that the trend data that we presented to HMIC NYFRS yesterday would indicate that we're on a
We're
on a positive trajectory in terms of ambulance,
Yeah.
Yorkshire YAS support, but we may see some ups and downs.
But it's something that we monitor through the Crisis Care Concordat, because he has do come to that.
Yeah.
So it just we might just flag it at that next meeting. Yeah. Okay.
So I think just in terms of slides 5 through 7, which is the incident volumes across each of the 3 command areas, I haven't really got a massive amount to say in relation to them. No particular exceptions for us to play through in relation to how activity is going. We I think aren't seeing significant difference in change. Oh, sorry, yeah. I'm trying to do 3 things at once. It's at least 2 beyond my capability.
So Kieran, just the thing that I just find really helpful is to have a crime version of slide 9.
Okay.
Which is slide 9?
So slide 9 is the one with the
the geographical areas.
Yeah.
Yep. I will.
Just so we can see where the up and downs are in the different geographies, because that really helps when you're going and talking to people.
Okay, 1 second. I'll make a note and then I'll replicate.
Yeah, thanks.
We did have that.
We did have that. That's why I
a
was.
little bit different. I know Mark's been off, and whether it's something to do with that.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. He's only back into the workplace yesterday
Yeah.
from his world tour. So
Yeah.
where am I? So I think obviously we're able to give you. We've given you there, haven't you? Sort of the force comparison on slide 8 in relation to crime. And as Will's already mentioned, we have got some increases in burglary and other areas. Probably a key one to discuss in terms of large increases is fraud. We've seen a significant increase in relation to cyber-enabled fraud cases, so those internet-type scams and similar. And in particular, quite a few pertaining to HMRC, television licence, council tax and similar.
I've seen that one.
So hopefully you haven't fallen victim to it.
No.
But we are seeing we've seen an increase in that, and that I think, as we mentioned when we were talking about organised criminality, reflects the prosperity of the local environment and the perception of relatively easy pickings in terms of maybe a slightly older population, maybe slightly less tech savvy and vulnerable in that regard. So one of the measures that we've put into place to assist us in that is acknowledging that the sort of action fraud product is the action fraud system is reflective of national standards, but we feel that potentially doesn't go far enough for some of the victims in the local area. So we've begun to create an overlaid record locally of those instances of fraud that are reported to us. So instead of just doing the standard signposting to action fraud, what we'll do now is we create a local record so that we can start taking action at the early stage rather than waiting for it to go through the action fraud cycle of triage and allocation back to forces. That appears to be going well in relation to some of our victims, and it helps us get on top of vulnerability at an earlier stage. Unfortunately, as we've talked already about some of these criminals being outside of the North Yorkshire Force area, we track them down to where they're in the UK, but very many of them are in Europe and beyond. So we're trying to focus on cutting down on susceptibility to victimisation.
And that's, I think, taking that to the next level with the investment from the precept into the prevention intervention work. So this is kind of some of the areas of data that will feed into those prevention intervention resources in terms of working with our communities and strengthening them and making them more resistant to crime.
And we hope to have the first people in play during the course of next month in relation to some of that investment. So fingers crossed we'll start to see an impact and at least a confidence impact amongst the public as well in terms of the people we touch around that area. We are starting to see, in terms of public order and violence offences, we are starting to see more offences reported in the stalking and harassment and lower level public disorder offences, which reflect that kind of behaviour, which we're seeing as a positive in the sense of the work that we've done within the force control room and the work we've done with patrol and staff in the context of ensuring that matters are reported appropriately in accordance with the crime guidelines. So that's starting to come through in a better way than perhaps we have been in historical times.
Is that off the back of then, assuming the timings match up with the work the force has done on promoting it, if that's the right word,
Raising awareness.
Raising awareness,
staff, because we started with, as you'll know, we run an internal campaign during the course of January and February, and we're now starting to put some more public messages out through March and April in relation to awareness on the part of officers and call handlers in particular, and then that public message of, this kind of behaviour is not acceptable, and if you contact the police, then we will do everything we can to pursue a proper investigation along the lines of, we'll talk about things being stalking first, harassment second, and then other offences following from that. So it's a trail that we're following, and we're seeing some improvement, but we'll need to do more.
So we had a presentation, I've spoken to Phil about this earlier on, we had a presentation yesterday by a group in Cheshire, which is a unit that has been funded through Police Reform and Transformation Fund money to look at this. They had some really clear views about the relationship between stalking and harassment, and that they are entirely separate. And unfortunately, the law links them together, and that's not helpful from a practical point of view when you're looking at those offences, because harassment can be quite, a lot of stuff in neighbourhood disputes, that sort of stuff. Stalking can lead, it is more along the sort of domestic abuse, coercive control, all of that side of things. And so we've got collectively quite a lot of questions around how NYP respond to this. We've been chipping away at it for quite a while, and I read the new domestic abuse strategy yesterday. I'm not sure that reflected what I think is emerging best practice through units like that. I think we are behind the curve on this.
And we'll pick that up with the head of safeguarding and ensure we have a look at that. I think there's always learning that we should be taking from other forces and looking at that best practice. And I think if they've had that and seeing the benefits of that, and that's something that we need to be looking at for our communities as well.
And it's not just the police though; it's partners as well, and looking at the domestic abuse strategy. I just felt that it seemed to be of its time and not perhaps as forward thinking as it could be, and I had some concerns around that.
So I suppose if we can give you the reassurance, Kieran's going to take that away and have a look at that with the head of safeguarding, and perhaps in a quarter or so bring that back and do a presentation, see when the next gaps are.
Well, August, but we can always move things around.
I mean, and the other thing that I would like to do is to look at the research that we're doing through the National Rural Crime Network, because control is coming out as one of the biggest single issues, as opposed to domestic violence. It's the control element of it, and that is much more challenging in lots of different ways.
I think, but it's still recognising it as a form of domestic abuse.
Yes, and stalking links in with the control element of it as well.
Yes, and I think that the approach we're seeking to promote, particularly with our contact management staff at that first outset, if somebody contacts us with issues pertaining to a relationship, we're encouraging them to think in the first instance, is there a stalking matter at play? If there isn't, is there a harassment matter at play within the context of that relationship? And then are there other matters as well we can pursue to ensure that we're taking that report at first instance as seriously as it ought to be taken?
Yes, it's understanding the context of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing, of course, that stalking in particular is not dependent upon a relationship.
No, at all.
Yeah.
No. So we've done a campaign on social media and other areas where and in the local press around the different types of stalking offender and the common types of stalking offenders. So there I think is clear about showing that and encouraging that reporting to us. We have ceased the use of police information notices.
Excellent.
So they've stopped again, and the push and the drive to our staff is investigate at this first port of call and look for stalking on all occasions first and foremost.
Yeah, because they were really causing problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult getting the control room, all the staff in the control room in one place. I think it happens a couple of times a year for your really key training. But should it be of interest, the Clive Ruggles, whose daughter was stalked and murdered in Northumbria, gives a most powerful presentation on the importance of the response to that first report, which was not good in her case. And I know he's more than happy to come around and speak to anybody at North Express.
And Alan Harder, our head of safeguarding, has been engaged with the Alice Ruggles Trust around that and had some contact already in relation to taking advantage of that. So
The other people that I think are really worth it sitting and reading their book is Luke and Ryan Hart. So their mother and sisters Charlotte and Claire were murdered by their father in Spalding in 2016, and they've written a book called Operation Lighthouse, and that is really worth a read. And that is about coercive control, and it's about the conclusions that they draw are really, really interesting, and a lot of what they say is reflected in the research that we've done.
And that
They come out and they talk to people as well.
No, that would be excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that one of the sort of key tenets of the work that we're going to do into those rural communities based on the additional funding is about trying to understand and draw out some of those coercion and control issues that are felt in some of the more isolated communities, so that we can try and offer the best help and support, whether that's a criminal justice outcome or a more supportive third sector statutory organisation that's non-policing, to help help victims extricate themselves from situations that they don't wish to be in any longer. So that's one of the design features of that work.
This research will really help with that. There's very significant barriers.
Yes.
And it's really complex.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Okay. And first of all, we need to do an analysis by postcode of where the incidents happen, because we don't do that at the minute. So we don't actually know where there's only one force in the country that does that.
Yeah, so that's the other element that Mark Bates and Nexus team are developing those dashboards for us. And stalking and harassment is one of the dashboards that should be coming online in relation to that Nexus as well, so we can look at actually what's the data and how we analyse Nexus. We should be able to get some postcode data.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. So there's one force, for example, that does all of that analysis and say, right, why haven't we had any reports in that area? That area is white.
Yeah.
What we need to fill the white spaces, because there's hidden harm there.
Yeah, without doubt.
And that's what we can look at that and cross-match it against the rural crime.
Anyway, we're drifting off, but whole load of work.
Yes. Yeah.
And it also feeds into vulnerability around fire as well.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So, happy to move on?
Yes, sorry. We're going to I've digressed now.
So I'll move past slide 9, and we'll, as I say,
sorry, just Kieran, on slide 8. I'm slightly concerned about. Well, I am concerned about some of the figures, the rises there. It'd be interesting to see it as a trend line.
Yes.
Yeah, rather than just the stats, because I want to understand where we are. Comparatively.
And I think to provide you some context behind that as well would be useful, because some of this is anticipated from changes in crime recording and some of the work we've undertaken around since our CDI inspection, crime data integrity inspection. I think some of that is there, so I think if we work that out, extrapolate that from the context and see actually where some of the additional concerns are.
Yeah. So we'll look to make some progress on providing that data in that way. And then happy to move past slide 9, which is the ASB figures, and then just to pick up on the proactivity in terms of work that we're undertaking in this world. I think you'll see that we do an awful lot, and which chimes in with the report and the presentation on ANPR and cross-border criminality, is that particularly with our firearms support unit, who might be less often deployed to incidents other than the reactive response to firearms matters, we try to appoint them towards our extremes to keep those borders as safe as we can, and in the same context our operational support unit teams the same. Clearly that the roads policing group is often more directed to its core activity around serious accidents and the like.
So was that 76% road traffic closures, not drug production? Then?
Yes, sorry, it's road traffic statistics. Yeah, there's only so many shades in the Power BI suite. So yes, yeah, they do a lot more on RTCs than drugs activity. And then I think to pick up, just if I can, we in terms of slides, I think 11 and 12. Excuse me. Talking about. Oh gosh, sorry. Yeah. I need another pair of hands. So just to pick up, although we're in that normal seasonal low period in terms of 999 calls, and you'll see on slide 12 101s, the bare numbers of those are higher than they have been in recent years. So we need to do some work to understand that. We're just to reassure, as part of the Transform 2020 work, we're involved with staff engagement and consultation now around the changes to working practices, which should see us better able to respond to calls for services within the force control room in the course of the coming months, and will undoubtedly see us better prepared for the summer than we perhaps might have been in recent years, and certainly prior to the additional investment that came. Our 999 performance, however, continues to be good, and you'll see that the average speed of answer is much improved on recent years, which is a positive for us, and we'll continue to work on that. And then, if I may, the 101 performance overall is better, but we've seen a bit of a drop off in terms of performance into February. That I have raised with the head of the control room, both that, but then also some continued issues during March in terms of patchy performance around speed of answer on the 101 setup, and we're working to seek to understand that a little bit better. We don't believe it'll be a training issue because we've got staff on stream. We have got some shortfalls in numbers, and part of the reorganisation of Transform 2020 will help us to address that in terms of staff moving into roles that are more focused towards answering the telephone.
But that seems to have impacted on the 999s as well, doesn't it? So you've got that little dog leg on both the charts.
Yes, yeah, we have. I mean, I think when we've got people engaged answering one or the other, once you start to lose one index, you lose both, really. So we know we need to pick that up. I mean, the good news for us around the 999 calls is that the level of abandonment is particularly low in terms of overall numbers, and much less than we'd seen at the back half of last year. But yes, you're right that there is a tweak of the performance in that environment.
Okay. All right.
And I think, unless there's anything you would like to pick out from slide 13, then I'm there, other than perhaps to just raise that when we've talked about burglary a little bit earlier, that sort of blip and an issue in and around Hambleton is one that we've managed to get on top of in terms of activity to make early arrests around burglary from commercial premises, farms and similar. But we have seen a recent spike, particularly out in Craven and on the Richmondshire border, which we're working on between the Rural Task Force and local crime teams.
Okay, brilliant. Now we've overrun by 4 minutes for Andrew.
Apologies.
And I've only been given 5 minutes on the agenda, but I'll talk about the Corporate Management Board response to the baseline report by PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Thanks, Kim.
The report was produced Julia, as you know, when you became the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, and it was really a report into the state of North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service at that time. The paper that I'm going to refer to now is one that I've felt important, that I personally wrote, but it's based on a session that the Corporate Management Board had where their individual ideas were put forward and they had a collective response to present. I haven't had the opportunity yet to share this paper back with CMB, which is why I haven't shared the paper in advance, because really I want to get approval, I suppose, for the paper before it's made public. But certainly these findings are what we discussed on the day. It's a really helpful report, and it's going to go alongside another 2 pieces of work. One will be the report by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services. They're coming into service in June this year, and they'll do a very detailed inspection of our performance, which this will go along with, and also the response to the current consultation you've got out at the moment on your Fire and Rescue Service plan, which the public have an opportunity to make comment on. So the report, overall, the Corporate Management Board of the Fire Service welcomed it. It's provided a barometer of the performance of the service and ideas for how we might improve. Now, much of this had already been identified and actions put in place to start to deal with the improvement, and there are other areas that are helpful pointers for progression. But what's worth noting, I think, is that I used this report as part of my preparation for coming up to North Yorkshire for the selection process, and reading it cold, it read as though North Yorkshire Fire Service was really in quite a flaky state, with an awful lot of work to do. The reality now, I've had a chance to see it for myself, is while we have work to do as a fire and rescue service, I think that the report probably paints a bleaker picture than the reality that I've experienced now. I've had a chance to work with Corporate Management Board and across the service. But all that said, it's still a really helpful position to have coming in. I was a little surprised by the fire service that were chosen as comparisons within the report, because they're not all terribly similar. This is a very personal view of mine, to North Yorkshire. I wondered whether places like Cornwall or Lincolnshire or Dorset and Wiltshire and Northern Ireland would have provided a more accurate comparison than places like Oxfordshire, Staffordshire or Kent. That said, they're the figures which are in here, and that's the comparison that's been made. We come out of that well in some areas and less well in others. If I go into some of the key themes that we've drawn from the report, first up was the difference that is made by North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, and the report's really encouragingly provides assurance that our efforts are of value, and that we make a positive difference to the lives of people in the City of York and North Yorkshire. We're pleased the dedication and commitment of staff is recognised in achieving this, and believe their pride at working in the service is well founded. They are the service. Actually, all you've got to do is look at the professionalism and the quality of the presentation earlier on by Carl and Lee to see that we're a service that takes issues like health and safety very, very seriously, and over a long period of years we continue to improve incrementally our approach to all of these issues. That's recognised in the report, and that's really helpful. The report recognises that we deliver our statutory functions, and that's through a number of pieces of legislation, not least of all the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Fire and Rescue Services Act, the Civil Contingencies Act, and various other acts of Parliament, and we deliver our statutory services. That's essential, both as an emergency service and as a public service. One thing that the report implies is perhaps an imbalance between prevention and protection within North Yorkshire, and too much of a lean towards protection. But that's really interesting now, following the release of the first tranche of reports by HMI into the Fire and Rescue Service, which has been critical of pretty much every service it's visited about the reduction that those services have introduced in fire protection, the legislative side of fire protection. And in North Yorkshire, actually, that's been strengthened with people on every fire station, watch managers, trained to be able to carry out audits, which builds the capacity of the service on top of our fire protection teams who solely focus on fire protection. So I suspect that that balance that we've got will probably be well received by HMI. So I'm quite positive about what we'll get through our inspection report. But we will continue always to seek the best balance between the use of our service delivery tools in terms of prevention, protection, response and building community resilience. Rurality is a theme that comes through strongly in the PwC report. It identifies quite correctly the challenges of rurality and having sparsity of population and the differing service models that this requires. It's different in the middle of York to the middle of the North York Moors, for example. And we'll consider this when we come to adapting the integrated risk management plan alongside a clearly defined response and service delivery strategy. The public, we aim, will know our intended response ambitions, and when we come to future reporting, we'll be reporting against those ambitions. What we state to the public we will achieve, we'll then tell them how well we're doing in achieving it, and the public will have an opportunity to tell us whether or not our ambitions meet their needs or not. We do wonder though whether the issue of rurality has been fully recognised by the team that produced the report, because the comparison tables don't always provide the most helpful insight when you're judging North Yorkshire against other similar services. I've already said that those similar services, I would have doubts as to whether they're the most similar services.
I think that was reflected back to him in the time, wasn't it? On both from you and from me as well.
They have different physical geographies, but also the funding regimes of those places are very different, and therefore the resources that are available to them. The report suggests that we should consider the number and location of fire appliances and fire stations as though they should reduce, and our water rescue teams as though they should reduce. But knowing the geography and the sheer scale of North Yorkshire, removing 1 or 2 or 3 fire stations would create enormous gaps with no response. Well, with a very long response time into them. But what we do appreciate is the difficulty of maintaining competence and availability in those quieter locations. You raised the issue of competence earlier on. So I wonder as we progress the service whether we'll look at different service delivery models in different areas with different appliance types and different crewing systems to be able to have a more nuanced and flexible approach to delivering the service across the whole of North Yorkshire.
So Andrew, can I just to pick up on that then, are you basically saying that what we've got is a bit of a one-size-fits-all at the moment, and actually there are some opportunities to try and flex that?
We're not one-size-fits-all. We've got different crewing systems, for example, day crewing, whole time and on-call. But I think there's probably more that we can do in terms of the type of appliances that we provide across our fleet and the way that they can be crewed in terms of numbers. So you can look at 4 different types of response vehicle to fires and rescues across the country. You'll have a smaller 4x4 based vehicle. They're introducing them in Cumbria at the moment, and they can proceed with 2 or 3 people with a limited response ability, to more of a van based vehicle which can respond with 2, 3 or 4 people with a broader range of kit and capability, to the style of tactical response vehicle that we have here in North Yorkshire, which is like a smaller version of a fire engine that can respond with 3, 4 or 5 people. And then the maximum capability, which is called a Type B fire appliance, which is a traditional fire engine that people would see, which can respond with a maximum capability with 4, 5 or 6 people. I wonder whether across that range of vehicles, crewing numbers and response capabilities, we can have a more balanced and nuanced approach to response within North Yorkshire. Now this is just ideas that float around at the moment from seeing these things around the country. What we would need to do is develop those ideas into an integrated risk management plan, which we then can consult with the public, with partners, with yourself, with our colleagues in the Fire and Rescue Service, consult on to see if that is the best way that we can spend our financial resources to deliver the physical and human resources that we need to provide our service delivery. That's something that will take place over the next, starting almost immediately and over the next 2 or 3 years while we really start to modernise and do that fundamental review that PwC talk about within their report. So there are short, medium and long-term opportunities for us to really develop into a modern, technologically advanced service which isn't one size fits all, where clearly the risk in certain places is very different to other parts of our area. It's a huge undertaking, but one that I don't think we'll be afraid to tackle. But if I move on, particularly considering time, the diversity of our workforce element that is brought out in the paper, we agree. We agree that recruitment provides a fantastic opportunity and that our workforce currently doesn't even nearly represent the communities that we exist to serve. We haven't had an open to the public recruitment programme for full-time firefighters for 10 years. And that's had a negative impact on diversity figures and is likely to have stifled the culture and creativity of the service. We would imagine that that's the case. So Corporate Management Board have committed to prioritising diversity when we have opportunities to improve in this area, when those opportunities present themselves. We will not take necessarily the easy option of internal transfer or transfer from other fire and rescue services. We will commit to having a full and open selection process that any member of the public can apply for, in the hope that that would broaden the pool of people that we can select from and help us improve the diversity, and in doing so help us improve the service that we're able to deliver because of a better understanding of our communities. The report on legislative compliance is very clear. I've already mentioned it. It's an essential to us as an emergency service and a public service, so it's pleasing to note that we're considered to be performing well against legislative compliance. The financial challenges. The report appears to suggest the weak financial position that we are in and our current reliance on reserves, and it suggests that that's not currently being addressed, and that's one of the things that was a concern for me when I first started to look at North Yorkshire. However, I realise now that plans were already in place and actions already being taken to deal with that issue.
I don't think that is true. I think there were some plans in place, but there were not comprehensive plans in place, and the reason the Finance Working Group was set up was to start to develop those plans and put them in place. So I think there were ideas around how the finances could be addressed, but there were not firm plans in place.
And particularly since November, with the transfer
Precisely.
of our governance,
Yeah.
it's led to the establishment of the finance group,
so,
which Carl chairs, and a more detailed
So Dave started this report in July. So by the time we got to November, when it was published, we'd had a period of time where things where things had been progressed because the severity of the financial position had been understood, and things were then started to be addressed.
And over the last few months, those have really started to gain
exactly.
momentum.
Yeah.
So I'm confident now that we will be in a position, we are in a position to address those financial challenges. They're already being met through Transform 2020, through changes to the capital programme, and there'll be further opportunities to address those financial challenges through the integrated risk management planning process.
Because the I can't remember if it was the last fire authority meeting where Chief Fire Gary Fielding presented the finances. He set out quite clearly at that point the state of the finances. So there was work subsequent to that was done to try and get it on track.
But certainly, from when they would have started that research to this point, we've moved
we
leaps
have
and
now,
bounds in terms of being able to manage that financial challenge because we were going to become unsustainable. Effectively, we can't continue to afford the service that we provide at the moment in the way that we provide it at the moment. And there are changes that will need to be made to make us financially sustainable and capable of delivering the appropriate service across the whole of the
And I think we need to be clear about that, because if we say we haven't got a financial challenge and then we have to make some difficult decisions, we're on a bit of a sticky wicket, really.
There's definitely a financial challenge, and that has been recognised loud and clear over the last few months. So you've already alluded to the Finance Working Group. That's been established, and it's one of the recommendations that PwC made in their report. That's now up and running. It's considering the money-saving ideas that have been generated within the service, and it's recommended a refreshed integrated risk management plan to create medium and long-term financial stability. We've also developed a reserves strategy, again a recommendation of the PwC report, and those reserves are much better understood now, and we have a clearer approach as to how we will maintain and use them. The IRMP and the Fundamental Service Review. and that's where I have it stated in the report, we cannot afford the service we currently provide, and changes are needed to the model. PwC report recognises this and recommends that fundamental review of how we operate and a new service delivery model. We acknowledge this very clearly and committed to addressing it. Our current integrated risk management plan runs until 2021. However, we need to adapt or replace it to best balance our use of resource and approach to service delivery before that. So we need to accurately meet the risk profile across our area and still meet those financial challenges. So what's happened, again, since November, we've considered the need for a project initiation document to trigger an IRMP work, and it's currently being adapted to meet the organisation's needs. We intend to complete the work during this financial year on the project initiation document, so we can implement changes during the next financial year, implement changes during 2021 to realise early savings. We're not going to wait until the very end of the current financial planning process to make changes to save money. We'd like to make those changes as early as we can, to save the money as early as we can, reduce reliance on reserves, and maintain a fund that will enable us to invest in the kind of technology and development that we spoke about earlier. The IRMP will either lead to or incorporate a service delivery plan, and that will incorporate our service delivery strategies and balance the use of our service tools like prevention, protection, response and resilience, planning, partnership and performance monitoring. It was interesting, Will, that you earlier on referred to Grenfell and the type of learning that we would take from that. What I would hope is that we are a learning organisation as opposed to a blaming organisation. So we'll always take all of the learning that we can from that and apply it to changes across the board, though, not only in response. So we would look at something like Grenfell, look at something like the Manchester Arena attack, and think, okay, how do we prevent that? How do we protect people when it happens? How do we improve our response to that and our ability to help people to help themselves in those circumstances? Which partners do we need to work with, and how do we plan for that type of an event? So rather than a singular siloed approach, we'll take a broad approach across all of our tools that we have for delivering our services. So I was a little surprised that the report recommended separate strategies for prevention, protection and response, because the whole point of an integrated planning approach is that we overlap all of these approaches that I just discussed to protecting our communities. So while we haven't finalised our approach to IRMP or the service delivery plan, it might be that we choose to have an integrated service delivery strategy to reinforce the approach and to encourage colleagues not to work in silos or take limited approaches to creating those safer communities that we talk about, and households and commerce. The report talks about our national capabilities in a positive light, but it does infer perhaps that we respond very seldom outside the boundaries of North Yorkshire. And we wonder whether that can be flipped to say, well, actually, every time we're called upon to respond beyond the boundaries of North Yorkshire, we do and we can, because we've got both the skills compliance and the availability of those resources. So actually, as a deliverer of national regional response, we perform really well.
On that note, next time is on major incidents, I think.
Okay, there you go. We can talk about that again. One of the things we're starting to discuss is aligning the integrated risk management process with the election cycle of the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner to enable the PFCC to have 1 year post-election working on an existing IRMP, during that year being able to have the opportunity to produce a brand new one for the following 4 years, including the next 3 years of their tenure before the next cycle. And we think that that will help to promote the importance of the PFCC's role in determining the ambitions of the service, considering that the PFCC is the person who holds the statutory responsibility for delivering those services. So that's something that we started to talk about, and we'll look at as to how that might be achieved. So, to summarise, we welcome the report, the essence of it, and many of its findings are accurate and reflective of North Yorkshire. It helps us to set the future direction of the service and our priorities in delivering the best possible service to the City of York and North Yorkshire. as I've already discussed, lots of the recommendations are already in train, have been put in train since the change of Fire Authority to Police Fire and Crime Commissioner, and the release of the report has been really helpful in helping us to do that. Some are on the horizon and will be delivered short, medium and long term. And I suspect that the change that North Yorkshire needs will take a number of years to achieve. This isn't something that will be achieved in a very short period of time. But there are changes that we've already introduced in the short term since your arrival as the authority, Julia. There are the medium-term changes that we'll start to deliver through the service delivery plan and the integrated risk management plan, and then the longer-term changes, which is that fundamental review and of the approach that we take to keeping the whole of our area safe, and some of the issues that we spoke about earlier on about balancing prevention, protection, response and resilience, and balancing the different types of response and crewing arrangement that we have to meet our financial capabilities, but also to meet very accurately the risk and the differing risk that exists across the whole area.
Great, thank you.
So I will now share this report with Corporate Management Board, make any minor tweaks that might be thought as appropriate, and then share it with you.
Okay, fabulous, and we'll publish it.
Excellent.
Right, brilliant, fantastic. Have we still got no questions, Simon?
Still no questions.
Excellent. Right, well it's not excellent, but we can move on. So apologies for running over by 10 minutes. Anybody got anything else they'd like? It was my fault for running over 10 minutes as well, so I apologise. Have we got any other business? No. Thank you everybody very much. Thank you, Charlotte.
Welcome.
Right, thank you, Simon. And thank you to
Ed.
Ed, thank you.